Chapter 357. Tianjing, the Warp Center. Su Xining walked out of the Warp Center that marked Jadeite City. He was carrying a bulging backpack on his back. It was filled with food that his mother had prepared for him. Su Xining suddenly looked up as if he sensed something. He saw the back of a long-haired girl flash past him. However, when he looked carefully again, the girl had already blended into the crowd and disappeared. Although Su Xining felt a little strange, he didn't pay much attention to it. He turned his head and looked at the bustling crowd in front of him. He swallowed his saliva. This was the first time he had seen so many people. There were all kinds of people, all kinds of skin colors, all kinds of races, all kinds of clothes, and all kinds of ages. There are so many people in Tianjing. He patted his face. Don't embarrass yourself. Then, under the guidance of the surrounding signs, he walked down to the underground floor. There was a subway that connected to every corner of Tianjing. Due to the vigorous promotion of the Warp Gate, its cheap and efficient characteristics quickly conquered everyone. Under the pressure of the Warp Gate, all the planes, trains, and shipping in the western and eastern continents were basically closed. Only some trains, planes, and ships were left for sightseeing and tourism. The large number of people brought by this caused the Warp Center in Tianjing to gradually become overwhelmed. However, the other 3 warp centers were already in the process of being built. One was located at the other end of Tianjing. The Federation of the Western Continent would also build another 2. The entire human world would be infinitely shrunk. Therefore, what appeared in front of Su Xining now was an unprecedented sea of people. Sorry, excuse me. Su Xining carried the huge backpack and could only slowly squeeze his way to the platform amidst the continuous apologies and complaints of the crowd. When he finally reached the back of the line, he couldn't help but sigh. There are so many people. At this moment, a cry of surprise came from the front of the subway platform. Su Xining looked up curiously and saw an old man with a head full of white hair rushing into the subway track. He was shouting something, but because there was too much noise around, she couldn't hear him at all. However, when Su Xining saw this scene, her entire body involuntarily rushed over. The huge bag kept colliding with the crowd, causing a series of curses. But Su Xining couldn't care less. The horn of the subway had already reached the platform. When he jumped onto the track and grabbed the old man's shoulder, the light from the front of the train had already shone on the platform. Let's go. Su Xining wanted to save the old man, but the old man struggled and shouted, Don't worry about me, just let me die. Let me die. I want the whole world to know that my son's death cannot be in vain. After all, Su Xining was young and strong. After some dragging, she managed to drag the old man to the platform. However, the old man's struggle became more and more intense. He even opened his mouth to bite Su Xining's arm. However, before she could bite Su Xining, a huge palm had already landed on the old man's neck, knocking him out. It turned out that a white man more than 2 meters tall had also jumped off the platform. After knocking the old man out, he immediately carried him up the platform with Su Xining. Just after they jumped off the platform, the train that had already entered the station slowly stopped about 10 meters away from them. In an instant, the whole platform was filled with applause. Well done. Beautiful. Su Xining wiped off the sweat on her forehead and exhaled a sigh of relief. Although he didn't hesitate at all when he saved the old man, now that he thought about it, he felt very scared. Are you okay? The white man who saved the old man with Su Xining patted him on the shoulder and said in Xia language, You're very good. My name is Jason. My name is Su Xining. Su Xining didn't expect this white guy in front of him to speak fluent Xia language. Only then did he have the time to size up the other party. The white man in front of him, Jason, was not only tall, but also very muscular. Although he was wearing clothes, his thick chest was like a city wall, giving people a strong sense of oppression. Just as the two of them were introducing themselves, a man in uniform walked up to them and said, "Excuse me, I'm a staff member of the subway. Can I trouble you to follow me to the office?" Seeing the two of them looking at him, he immediately explained, "Don't worry, I just want to take your contact information and ask about your situation at that time." 10 minutes later, in the subway office, Su Xining nodded and said, "That's the basic situation. I don't know that old man." He looked at the staff member in front of him who was taking note. In the end, he couldn't help but ask, "How is that old man now? Why did he want to commit suicide?" The staff member looked at the two of them hesitantly and sighed, "Forget it, I won't tell you anyway. You'll see it in the newspaper the next day. You know about the Western continent's War of Unification, right?" Seeing the two of them nod, he continued, "Although the military has tried their best to end the war as quickly as possible, there are still many people who died. That old man just now, his son seems to be a soldier of a country in the Western continent. This was also one of the series of reactions brought about by the warp gate. The flow of information, humans, and resources greatly increased, which also brought about a series of societal effects that needed to be resolved by the government." Seeing the heavy atmosphere, the staff member looked at the backpacks on their backs and suddenly said, "You two aren't here to take the entrance exam of Academy City, are you?" Su Xining's face reddened, then lowered his head in embarrassment and said, "Yes, although I don't have any abilities. I heard that Academy City has opened an ancient class for the powerless, so I wanted to give it a try." The white man named Jason also nodded. "I don't know if I have the ability or not. I originally planned to take part in the martial arts tournament in 2 months, but I heard that Academy City is also recruiting the powerless, so I wanted to give it a try." Hearing their answer, the staff member smiled. It was obvious that their actions of risking their lives to save someone had won him a good impression. He smiled and said, "Academy City is a very difficult place to enter. Even though there's an entrance test every month, I heard that the passing rate of their entrance test is less than 1%, which means that only 1 out of 100 people will be able to enter. And that's the passing rate for ability users. If they're recruiting people without ability users this time, I'm afraid the passing rate will be even lower." Hearing his words and facing such a harsh passing rate, both Jason and Su Xining showed a worried expression. The staff member continued, "But if you don't pass, you don't have to take it to heart. After all, if you want to pass that kind of exam, you have to have 1 in a million aptitude and a little bit of luck. If you don't get in, Tianjin has a biotech college, which is also a superpower college. You can give it a try. Other than that, if you're sure that you don't have the ability, you can use the warp portal to go to Chiching City in Baiwei. There are many secret martial arts sects there. Right now, there are many young people who have been tested to be powerless. They have all gone there to cultivate their ancient abilities." Hearing this, Su Xining's expression didn't change, but Jason's eyes lit up. He came to Xia to pursue greater power. If he couldn't get into Academy City, Baiwei was indeed a good place to go. Moreover, he used to fight in the underground boxing ring in the Federation and practiced fighting techniques for many years. He believed that if he cultivated his ancient abilities, he would have some advantages. A few minutes later, the two of them walked out of the subway office together. Jason looked at Su Xining and said, "Since you're also taking the exam, let's go together. But if you think about it, we are also competitors." Su Xining scratched her head and smiled. "I'm just an ordinary high school student. Brother Jason, you're obviously much stronger than me. Your success rate is also much higher than mine." "That's not necessarily true." Jason shook his head. The two of them went together and rushed to the Tianjin branch of Academy City. After all, the Sky Academy had taken off. If ordinary people wanted to find Academy City, they could only go to their office in Tianjin. Chapter 358. After leaving the subway office, Jason and Su Xining first went to Academy City's Tianjing office to sign up for the entrance test. But the actual test will only start in 3 days. As for what the test will be, they'll find out when the time comes. The two looked at the long line at the registration office, looked at each other and smiled bitterly. They didn't have much confidence in their success. So after signing up, they went to find a hotel together. When they walked to the door of a hotel, Su Xining seemed to feel something and suddenly turned her head. She saw a long-haired woman turn the corner, leaving her with a beautiful back view, and then disappeared. Jason patted Su Xining's shoulder and asked, "What are you looking at?" "That over there." Su Xining thought for a bit, but still shook her head. "Nothing, let's go in." The two went to the front desk and asked, "Boss, let's get 2 rooms." "No more. There's only 1 room with a big bed, I think you two should just squeeze in." A middle-aged man at the front desk looked up at the two, yawned and said, "You're also here to take the entrance test, right? This is the first time Academy City is recruiting people with no abilities. There are at least 300,000 to 400,000 candidates in Tianjing, and there will be even more in the next 3 days. The surrounding hotels are already full." Just as he was speaking, another young man carrying a large box walked in from outside the door. After seeing this, Jason took the money and slapped it in front of the boss. "We'll take the room, 10 days. Su Xining still wanted to persuade him, but she felt that the booking time was too long. But Jason had been fighting underground for a few years, so he was quite rich and didn't care about the accommodation fee. The boss took the money with a smile, and then enthusiastically handed over a small booklet. "This is the shop's exclusive sale, it's information about Academy City's entrance test. Would you two like to buy one?" Su Xining's eyes lit up and grabbed it. She saw the words written on it. The 100 questions of Academy City's interview. Ancient abilities, let us rely on hard work to defeat geniuses. Basic superpower knowledge organized by amazing people, no need to fear the entrance test anymore. Superpowers come from nothing, allowing you to become an ability user in 5 days. Jason took a quick glance at the book and realized that the title on the cover was shocking enough. It was obviously a made-up booklet used to cheat money. However, when he saw Su Xining's eyes glowing, he shook his head and sighed. He did not stop her from buying it. As soon as they entered the room, the two of them tidied up a little. Su Xining's eyes lit up as she flipped through the booklet, while Jason lay on the bed and turned on the TV to watch. Whether it was Su Xining or Jason, the two of them had grown up in hardship. They did not mind being in the same room and squeezed on the same bed. Jason turned on the television, which was broadcasting the news. Today, the construction of Tianjing's West Warp Center has officially broken ground. In order to accommodate more and more tourists from all over the world, the West Warp Center will be bigger than the old one, which is the current East Warp Center. It is estimated that after completion, it will have more than 4,000 warp halls and can accommodate 300 to 400 million passengers per day. It is worth noting that the construction of the West Warp Center this time will use the RAS's newest Dragonoid engineering robot. They will work together with ability users to build the center. Today, the first Prophet satellite was successfully launched at Ural City in the southern part of the Federation. The Prophet satellite uses the Federation's newest technology to monitor all kinds of natural disasters and criminal activities. It is also connected to the world's police network, effectively preventing criminal activities everywhere. According to FAA spokesperson Jim Parsons, the Pan-Continent Alliance will launch more than 30 Prophet satellites around the world in the next 3 months, covering the entire world with a disaster and crime monitoring network. Jason took a few glances at the news, but nothing interested him. He turned around and saw a movie being broadcasted. The movie was called The Resistance, and it was about an alien invasion. A Xia boy's parents were killed by aliens, and he awakened an ability. He joined the army, grew stronger and stronger, and finally defeated the aliens with the help of his companions. Speaking of which, ever since Li Anping appeared out of nowhere, all the movies about ability users had been selling very well. It was said that a couple of Xia Dragonfinch players were invited to make cameo appearances in this movie last year, and the box office sales were very good. Compared to the boring news, the blockbuster movie in front of Jason was much more interesting. Damn it, how did it end already? Jason, who was watching the movie with relish, suddenly cursed. It turned out that the movie ended when the young man repelled the aliens and was about to lead the Earth army to counterattack the aliens' home planet. He turned around and saw that Su Xining was still tirelessly reading the booklet in her hand. He asked with a smile, "How was it? Did you learn anything?" Su Xining raised her head and stared at Jason with reddened eyes, giving him a fright. I see, she said to Jason excitedly. Brother Jason, did you know? The current leader of Xia Dragonfinch, Bai Xinghe, was the emperor of the Shang dynasty over 2,000 years ago. Back then, he sealed himself in ice for the sake of immortality. He was not an ability user when he was young, but the reason why he became so strong was that he found a secret manual under the cattail hassock when he was cleaning the ancestral hall of his family. Then, he practiced a secret martial art called the Supreme Monarch Technique. Look. As she spoke, she took out the booklet. Jason glanced at it, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. It was filled with messy figures, and then there were 5 big red words. Supreme Monarch Technique. She stood up and patted Jason on the shoulder. However, when she saw the eagerness on Jason's face, she sighed and said, "You can just take a look at this." After that, she shook her head and walked out of the door. "I'm going to get some dinner. Do you want me to bring anything?" Su Xining lowered her head and stared at the booklet in her hand. She said without turning her head, "No need, I have food in my bag." 8 p.m., Tianjin University, 13th floor of the Imperial Library. Li Anping floated in the air. Around him, dozens of books were all facing him. They spun around him like rings. The dozens of books were flipped by the field of nothingness, one after another. It was as if they were turning the pages for Li Anping to see. Most of these books were very thick. The contents on the covers were all related to quantum mechanics, such as the foundation of quantum mechanics, the new quantum world, the ghost in the atom, the history of elementary particle physics, and so on. For the past few days, Li Anping had been staying in Tianjin. As for New Dongyang, he had already completed the electromagnetic drive. There was no need to recharge it through the nuclear reactor anymore, so he left it to the Royal Academy of Sciences. During this time, Li Anping had basically completed the reconstruction of all matter except for his brain. He was optimizing and supplementing some of the contents, such as the strong interaction force, the weak interaction force, and the problem of consciousness that Li Anping had no clue about. He reached out with both hands and grabbed a handful of air molecules. The so-called electromagnetic force is the repulsion of like and attraction of opposite. According to quantum electrodynamics, its essence is the result of 2 particles exchanging photons non-stop. All interactions between particles in the world, from the collision of electrons to the labor of the human body, are just the result of this electromagnetic force. But when it comes to the inside of an atomic nucleus, it's a matter of the strong interaction force and the weak interaction force. The former attracts the protons and neutrons in the nucleus, while the latter causes so-called decay. Add in the gravitational force, and these 4 forces are the only forces in the entire universe. Thinking up to this point, Li Anping's hands began to move. The air molecules in his hands began to change into various colors. According to current theories, the electromagnetic force is the exchange of photons, the strong interaction force is the exchange of mesons, and the weak interaction force is the exchange of intratomic bosons. Their essence is the same. They are the same type of force. So, after a series of blue electric sparks, the colorful air in Lianping's hands started to form a lump of meat. Then this thumb-sized lump of meat kept on changing and growing. He was changing the chemical properties of atoms, changing the essence of matter on the basis of the reconstruction of matter. A few seconds later, like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle, the lump of meat had additional eyes, a nose, and a tail. A snow-white little mouse appeared before him. This mouse had a heartbeat and blood was flowing. It looked no different from a real mouse. However, Lianping looked at the motionless mouse in his hands and revealed a disappointed expression. No consciousness? Why? How is this different from cloning? What on earth are the so-called consciousness and soul? If I don't complete this step, I won't be able to truly reconstruct myself, complete the reconstruction of my consciousness, and enter the next stage. After the electromagnetic drive and the reconstruction of matter, the third stage of Lianping's plan was what he called quantum computation. Just then, a series of footsteps, breathing, and heartbeat entered Lianping's ears. He waved his hand gently, and the mouse in his hand turned into a row of bubbles, dissipating into the air. 10 minutes later, Xia Yunyan opened the door to the reading room and walked in. She saw Lianping still floating in midair, surrounded by several tens of books that kept on flipping their pages automatically. "Brotherly, I have something to ask you," Xia Yunyan said sweetly as she looked at Lianping, who was reading. Lianping turned and landed on the ground. The books around him closed by themselves as if there were hands controlling them from a distance. Then they flew back into the bookshelves. "What is it?" Xia Yunyan walked in front of Lianping and extended her hand. "The organism in my body is called black goo. I've been asking Sherwin and the others to research it at the RES, but I heard that you've been thinking about the problem of consciousness and the soul, so I thought I'd show you this. Maybe it'll help you." It was true that Lianping had asked the RES about this recently, but he hadn't been able to fully understand the ability to absorb souls until now. Naturally, the RES couldn't help him in the slightest. Xia Yunyan, on the other hand, wanted to help Lianping after hearing Sherwin talk about it. Or rather, she wanted to find an excuse to get closer to him. Following Xia Yunyan's words, a ball of black mucus appeared on her palm. It didn't look like a living thing at all, but it swayed left and right, and even let out a roar, just like a little lion. "Oh!" Lianping's gaze immediately focused on Xia Yunyan's palm. "Will it affect you if I take some of this black goo?" "It's fine." Xia Yunyan shook her head and blushed a little when she saw Lianping staring at her at such a close distance. "You can take as much as you want. I don't need a lot, just a little bit is enough." Lianping stretched out his right hand. Before the black goo and Xia Yunyan could react, a flash of lightning appeared, and a thumb-sized part of the black goo on Xia Yunyan's palm fell into Lianping's hand. The cut-off part of the black goo immediately grew back, but its roars were even louder this time. The small ball of black goo in Lianping's hand also roared and bared its fangs. It looked like there were two of them. Interesting. Is it group awareness or something else? Lianping scanned the black goo with his mental force field, but he still raised his head and said to Xia Yunyan, "Thank you." Xia Yunyan said happily, "It's fine as long as it's useful to Big Brotherly." Chapter 359. At night, Su Xining stood on the rooftop of the hotel. Looking at the Tianjin night and the busy streets, he sighed faintly. He had a feeling that the prosperity of this city didn't belong to him. Because many of the contents in the booklet were too shocking, he excitedly went to talk to the hotel owner. In the end, he was stopped by Jason, who told him that more than 99% of the contents in the booklet were made up, and that it was as shocking as it could be. Just take it as a pastime. "Big brother Jason, do you think we can pass the test?" Jason raised the beer bottle in his hand and took a sip and said casually, "I want to join Academy City just to pursue more power." If I can't get in, I plan to go to Baiwa to try my luck. But I've only learned Xia language this year. If I go there, I'll have to learn Baiwa language again. Big brother Jason, you're really amazing. You can actually learn Xia language in such a short time. Su Xining suddenly raised her head and asked, I heard that the Western continent has always blocked the news of ability users. What about now? Do the normal people there know about ability users? Jason smiled and said, Yes, everyone knows about it. After the Western Continent Unification War, whether they want to believe it or not, they can only accept it in the end. Is that so? Actually, I'm very grateful to His Majesty Lianping, Jason said. If it wasn't for him, scum at the bottom of society like me wouldn't even know about the existence of the so-called superpowers. I'll probably keep fighting until I save up some money and go back to my hometown to open a small shop, or I'll fall in the ring one day. After that, Jason finished the rest of the beer and threw it on the ground. Yes, I'm also very grateful to His Majesty. Su Xining nodded and a smile appeared on her face. I really like superpowers. While the two were talking, Su Xining's expression suddenly changed. She pointed at a building in front of them and said, Big brother Jason, do you see that? There's a girl there. Jason also looked up at the opposite building, but there was nothing. I didn't see her. She must have left. She's there. Su Xining pointed to the roof and said, Look, the one with black hair and white clothes. He suddenly reacted. I think I've seen her somewhere before. Jason shrugged. Are you too nervous? I can't see anyone at all. Su Xining looked at the girl on the opposite rooftop. The girl was standing at the edge of the rooftop, pacing back and forth. Although he did not know why Jason could not see the girl, he still said, No, she looks like she wants to commit suicide. I have to stop her. Hey, are you hallucinating? I can't see anything. Jason turned around and found that Su Xining had already rushed down the rooftop. This kid. Wait. Could it be a metahuman? Jason looked up, but the edge of the roof of the opposite building was still empty. When Su Xining pushed open the iron door and rushed to the roof of the building, she saw that the entire roof was empty. Has she left? Just as Su Xining was rejoicing, a cold female voice suddenly appeared behind him. Can you see me? Su Xining turned around immediately. Under the bright moonlight, a young girl with long black hair, wearing a white robe, and standing barefoot on the rooftop was coldly sizing him up. The young girl's face was so perfect that it did not look human. She was like an elf under the moon, emitting a captivating aura. Su Xining was stunned. This young girl was a creature born from the spiritual network. Lianping used the spiritual energy field of the tens of thousands of clones in Tianjing to create a body. She was completely spiritual and immaterial. She was used to test the condition of the spiritual network, and also an experimental body that Lianping used to study the so-called consciousness. It could be said that this beautiful young girl was an extension of Lianping's consciousness. If people who were familiar with the Queen of Heaven saw her, they would realize that this young girl was simply a black-haired version of Xia's Queen of Heaven. In fact, this was also a form that Lianping had purposely created to prevent the situation before him. After all, the spiritual network involved top secret. If someone like Su Xining saw him while he maintained his original form, it would be too easy for him to attract attention. Seeing Su Xining suddenly blushing, Lianping clearly did not notice how attractive his current appearance was. He only frowned and said in his usual cold voice, Hey, are you deaf? No. Su Xining had never spoken to such a beautiful girl before. She said nervously, I just saw you here and was afraid that you would want to jump off the building. At this moment, the iron door on the rooftop was knocked open again. Jason rushed up with a baton in his hand. When he saw Su Xining, he shouted, Hey, are you okay? I thought about it. What you just saw might be a metahuman. However, he saw Su Xining pointing at him in a daze. Ghost. It turned out that the moment Jason rushed out, he had directly passed through Lianping's body. Don't be silly. I'm not a ghost. Lianping frowned. Normal people can't detect me, and can't touch me or even communicate with me. Only a metahuman like you can see me. After Lianping finished speaking, he looked at Jason. But this big blockhead is much more outstanding than you. Whether it's alertness or stamina. Su Xining closed her mouth, then suddenly reacted and shouted, Wait, you said I'm a metahuman? Jason asked, What metahuman? Xining, who are you talking to? Lianping frowned and snapped his fingers with his fair right hand. The next moment, Jason's eyes went blank and he stood still on the spot. Seeing this scene, Su Xining immediately stood in front of Jason and looked at Lianping warily. What did you do to Big Brother Jason? Another childish fellow. But his ability is indeed a little special, and he's only at level 0. Lianping looked at Su Xining and said coldly, He's fine. He'll recover in a minute. You're here to take the entrance test of Academy City, right? Su Xining was shocked. How did you know? Of course, Lianping wouldn't tell her that the moment he saw Su Xining, he had already exchanged information with the supercomputer in Xia Long K base through electromagnetic signals. He immediately found out all the information related to Su Xining. It could be said that in less than a second, all the things that had happened to Su Xining since she was young appeared in his mind. Naive, childish, and unrealistic. These were Lianping's thoughts. In your current state, you definitely won't be able to enter Academy City. Lianping didn't give the other party a chance to refute and continued with a cold expression. I need a few special metahumans to conduct some tests. If you're willing to help me, I can teach you how to enter Academy City. Really? After Su Xining said that, she immediately asked doubtfully, But what method do you have? Also, what kind of experiments do you need? Lianping couldn't be bothered to say more to Su Xining. He enveloped her with his spiritual force field. His tone was still cold, but in Su Xining's ears, it was incomparably friendly and persuasive. In short, tomorrow night at 12 o'clock, go to the artificial lake in the Central Park. Other than you, there will be 2 other people. Remember, don't be late. Su Xining nodded. Under the other party's spiritual suggestion, she didn't have any other thoughts. She just felt that she should seize this opportunity. At the next moment, Lianping nodded and disappeared with the wind. Jason, who was at the side, also woke up at once. He looked at Su Xining and continued the previous topic. How was it? Are you okay? I'm fine, Brother Jason. Let's go down. Su Xining's mind was now filled with the beautiful girl who was like a fairy under the moonlight. In Xia Dragonfinch's office, Bai Xinghe was facing the computer screen. Because he had been sleeping for more than 2,000 years, he didn't know a lot of modern knowledge at first. However, as a level 5 ability user, he had a strong learning ability. In less than 2 years, he had already completed 10 or even 20 years' worth of learning. Even now, after becoming the leader of Xia Dragonfinch, he still didn't give up learning, especially scientific and computer-related knowledge, which was very helpful for his work and the cultivation of various secret martial arts. 2,000 years ago, he studied all kinds of knowledge and learned all the secret martial arts in the divine domain. Today, 2,000 years later, he was still learning. He kept improving himself and his abilities with modern knowledge. If you don't move forward, you will fall behind. That was his belief. He looked down on people like Emma, who was lazy to study and cultivate all day long. He looked down on people like her. At this moment, a staff member knocked on the door. Come in. My lord, this is a letter for you. A letter? Bai Xinghe took the letter in confusion. He couldn't figure out who would send him a letter in this era. After opening the letter and reading it for only a few seconds, a cluster of red flames rose from Bai Xinghe's palm. There was shock, joy, and hesitation in his eyes. But in the end, the tall figure of a man in a white robe appeared in front of him. Recalling the man's unparalleled strength, fear was drawn into his heart again, mixed with shock, joy, and hesitation. Bai Xinghe had never felt so complicated in his entire life. He raised his head and looked at the staff member in front of him. His eyes were as cold as the edge of a blade. Where did this letter come from? Chapter 360. On the same night, Li Anping changed to the roof of another building. He was still in his long-haired, white-clothed female spiritual form, looking down at the night sky of Tianjing City. The doctor had already begun to set up a global spiritual network. However, because he could not use all of his people to do this, according to Li Anping's calculations, it would take about half a year. Therefore, although the spiritual network in Tianjing had been set up, Li Anping usually only used it to test some problems and did not fully activate it. Even the spiritual network in Zhongdu had been adjusted to a very low value. He planned to wait until the spiritual network covered the whole world before activating it together so that no one would have the chance to react. But right now, the mental network was more useful for him in other ways. He needed to collect more data, do more experiments, and run more tests. Soul, spirit, consciousness, what exactly were they? The 12th nightmare test begins. That night, another 8 people in Tianjing City fell into a terrifying hell. By the time Zhao Wei woke up, he was no longer in his bedroom. Under his body was a wooden floor, and above his head was the beam of a small wooden house. When Zhao Wei hugged his head and stood up shakily, he found himself standing in a small house. A wolf head specimen hung on the wall, and there was a fireplace facing Zhao Wei. The entire house was made of wood. Through the window, he could see a dark forest outside. From the outside, it looked like a Federal-style hunter's hut. Other than him, there were 9 other men and women in the room. 5 of them were like him, slowly crawling up from the floor. The other 3 adult men were standing at the side, looking at them with cold gazes. Zhao Wei glanced at them and asked uneasily, "Hello? May I ask where this is? I remember that before I fell asleep, I was in my bedroom." Among the 3 men, the youngest, who looked very thin and was probably a high school student, stood up and said to Zhao Wei and the other 5 men and women, "Everyone, the information of the realm of nightmare has been injected into your minds. If you think about it carefully, you should know." Zhao Wei listened to his words and began to think carefully. In the blink of an eye, an inexplicable message appeared in his mind. The realm of nightmare was a real space. After being pulled in, he would enter this place every Sunday night. The only thing you need to do is to survive here. As long as you can survive, wealth, power, and authority, you can get anything in this world. Before Zhao Wei could react to the meaning of this message, a middle-aged woman among the remaining 5 had already started arguing. "What are you doing?" she shouted. "Where is this? I still have to go to work tomorrow morning. Why did you kidnap me here?" The young man among the 3 sneered, "The door is right there. If you want to leave, feel free to do so." The middle-aged woman looked at the 3 of them suspiciously, then walked straight to the door and left. After seeing her leave like this, a man and a woman of working age also left. The only people left in the room were Zhao Wei, a middle-aged man in a suit, and a barefoot girl with black hair and white clothes. When he saw the girl's face, Zhao Wei couldn't help but be stunned because she was very beautiful. At least, she was much more beautiful than the celebrities he saw on TV. 163. When he saw the middle-aged woman and the other 2 leave, Zhao Wei looked at the girl suspiciously. She seemed to have just said a number. Seeing the 3 leave, the young man who looked like a high school student sneered a few times and said to Zhao Wei and the other 2, "Okay, those 3 idiots have left. Since you chose to stay, it means that you're not stupid. I'll give you 5 minutes to ask questions." At this time, Zhao Wei had the time to carefully size up the three people who were obviously different from them. Other than the young man who looked like a high school student, the other two were a muscular man wearing a black singlet and a shaved hedgehog head. The other was a young man wearing glasses with slightly long hair and wearing sportswear. When he saw this, Zhao Wei suddenly reacted. He lowered his head and saw the clothes on his body. He clearly remembered that he was sleeping on the bed, but now, he had changed into a set of shirt and trousers that he usually wore to work. Just as he was surprised, the middle-aged man in a suit had already started to ask, "Where is this? Who are you? Why am I here?" His eyes were full of vigilance and doubt. Obviously, he did not believe in the realm of nightmare at all. However, out of some consideration, he did not rush out with the middle-aged woman and the others. The gentleman with glasses replied, "We don't know where this is. Every nightmare will lead us to a different world. There's basically no chance of success. As for us, we've only experienced a few more worlds than you." The high school student on the other side continued, "My name is Lin Ku. The one with glasses is Miao Ji. The muscular man is Qin Zhuang. Ever since you entered the realm of nightmare, you'll come in once a week and experience a world. These worlds may be myths, legends, novels, games, animations, movies. In short, they're all very dangerous. If you're not careful, you might die." Die? The middle-aged man was surprised. "You mean we might die? What do you think?" Link, who looked like a high school student, said disdainfully, "Up until now I've confirmed that 30 people have died in the realm of nightmare. Do you think this is an amusement park that ends with a dream every week?" The middle-aged man frowned and said, "But isn't this a nightmare? It's called the realm of nightmare, and won't we go back after we wake up?" "That's right. After we wake up, we'll return to our original world. It feels like a dream." Miao Ji pressed his eyes and sneered at the middle-aged man. "But if you really think this is just a dream, then try killing yourself. Let me tell you in advance, in the 3 worlds I've experienced before, I've memorized the faces and names of 15 victims. After I went back, I investigated them. They all died of various accidents and diseases on the same day." What Miao Ji did not know was that although Li Anping could simulate most natural phenomena after mastering electromagnetic force, strong interaction force, and weak interaction force, he could also show the various changes in the realm of nightmare to their own bodies. However, he did not really kill the dead. He only erased their memories in the realm of nightmare. Then, he modified the memories of Lin Ku and the other survivors, changing the faces and names of the dead to the people who died in Tianjing that day. The middle-aged man was shocked when he heard this. He then asked, "Are you saying that if we die here, we will die in an accident outside?" "Who knows?" The muscular man, Qin Zhuang, said, "I only know that everything that happens here will affect our physical bodies in the real world. The strength I train here can also be used in the real world. Just treat this place as a real world." Zhao Wei also asked, "Then how do we go back? Do we have to experience the realm of nightmare every week in the future?" "I don't know." Miao Ji smiled bitterly and said, "At least so far, we haven't found any way to completely leave this space. Could it be some kind of ability?" Zhao Wei suddenly shouted, "Have you tried to report what happened here to the government? If the Emperor knows, do you think we haven't tried such a simple thing?" Lin Ku said angrily, "We can't do it at all. After leaving the realm of nightmare, we can't say a word about any information about this place. The 3 of us can't even communicate about this place." Miao Ji clapped his hands and said, "Okay, that's the end of the question." He looked at the nervous Zhao Wei, the middle-aged man who was still full of vigilance, and the barefoot girl who had not said a word since she appeared with a cold expression. When he saw the girl's appearance, a trace of pity flashed in his eyes. Based on his experience, girls like this were often the group of people who were most likely to die. "Now, tell me your names and occupations." If we want to live, we have to work together. We have to work together. Zhao Wei nodded. My name is Zhao Wei. I do interface design. Qian Lin. I do business. Miao Ji looked at the silent girl and asked, What about you? What's your name? The 5 men present looked at the girl together. No matter who it was, there was a trace of surprise in their eyes when they looked at the girl. At the same time, they were also looking forward to what the girl's voice sounded like. The girl said coldly, Hey, you can call me Hey. At this moment, a series of shrill screams suddenly sounded in the forest outside the house. It's the 3 guys who just went out. Then, they saw the middle-aged woman who had just rushed out run in with her face covered in blood. She closed the door and leaned her body against the back of the door. She screamed crazily, Zombie! Zombie! In the end, a sickle pierced through the back of the door and pierced through her chest. 123. This time, Lin Ku seemed to have heard it more clearly. He turned his head to look at the girl who called herself Hey. She seemed to have just said another number. On the other side, Lin Ku and the others had already moved. There's something outside. Block the door. Seeing this, the middle-aged man's expression changed and he ran to the other side of the house. In the end, he had only run a few steps when a female zombie with a rotten body rushed out from the shadows with an axe in her hand. She chopped his head with the axe. In the next moment, a few more zombies rushed in from the back door through the window. Chapter 361. On the other side, Qin Zhuang was pushed to the ground by a zombie. He struggled frantically, but he could not shake off the zombie on his body. 92. Then it was Lin Ku and Miao Ji's turn. A 2-meter-tall zombie with chains and scythes in its hands slammed open the door and dragged the 2 of them out. 45. 62. Zhao Wei watched the bloody scene in front of him with his eyes wide open. The fear that seeped into his bones made him unable to move. Only the girl beside him reported 3 unknown numbers one by one. In the next moment, Zhao Wei was completely drowned by the swarm of zombies. Before he died, he could only see the girl looking at him coldly. There was not the slightest change in expression on that beautiful face, as if she was looking at a little white mouse. 12. The next second, Zhao Wei opened his eyes again. Below his body was a wooden floor, and above his head was what seemed to be the roof beam of a small wooden house. When Zhao Wei stood up shakily, holding his head, he found himself standing in a small house, and the memory of the previous scene had been erased. It was still a similar scene. The only difference was that the barefoot girl was no longer among these people. This time there were only 8 of them. Lianping, who had transformed into a barefoot girl, quietly watched the various performances of the 8 people in the wooden house and recorded the numbers of their various choices and outcomes. Hundreds of experiences, but the choices that each person makes at each moment are limited. As the number of times gradually increases, the probability of each choice they make appears. What makes the choice? The brain? The brain is just a pile of atoms. It's also made of various atoms. What's the difference between it and a stone or a piece of soil? Breaking down the atoms of a stone and then replacing the atoms of the brain. There's no difference. Then, how did our brain give birth to something like consciousness? In front of Lianping, it was like countless television screens were flashing. Each screen was filled with various people's experiences in the realm of nightmare. They were either surrounded by zombies, surviving in the wilderness, or fighting monsters in space. Different people, different environments, but everyone made their own choices according to a certain pattern. Every time the plot was repeated, the data they chose would be summarized and sent to Lianping. As thousands of people continued to be reincarnated, their data quickly exceeded 200G and kept increasing. Similarly, as the number of times increased, the probability of each choice became more and more obvious. What is consciousness? Brain activity? but most people can't feel their brain activity at all. When he wants to get up, he bends down, props his hands up, and gets out of bed. When he wants to eat, he shoves the spoon into his mouth. The food enters his stomach and begins to be digested. Exercise, digestion, sleep. We don't need to direct our bodies. He does it subconsciously. Ordinary people have no idea how the brain works. It's like a function of a computer. Humans only input and output. Modern science believes that consciousness is a combination pattern. Just like the music score itself is not a tune. The information recorded in the music score is a tune. The pages and words are not a novel. The content recorded on the paper is. Consciousness, on the other hand, was a combination of atoms. It formed an extremely complicated algorithm. When we input the content, it will automatically output the result. Ordinary people can't control the process. On the 13th floor of the Imperial Library, Li Anping's hands were emitting dense blue electric light. Clouds of air were constantly changing in his hands. It began to gradually multiply from a cell and slowly turned into a huge ball of meat. Just like basic words, different words combine and a novel is born. Atoms combine in a special way and consciousness will be born, but everyone's consciousness is still different. Everyone's consciousness is like a unique function. In Li Anping's eyes, it was as if thousands of people were constantly reincarnating in the realm of nightmare, constantly making choices. Different inputs lead to different results. Every function is unique. Even if two functions have the same input, they may produce different results. But this algorithm is too complicated. It's so complicated that even if a person's entire life is input into a supercomputer, it's difficult to predict what he will do in the next second with 100% certainty. No, it's impossible to predict. Humans are made up of unpredictable atoms. It's just that there's a certain probability on a macroscopic level. Not only that, human consciousness is more advanced than ordinary functions. The electric light in Li Anping's hands became more and more intense. In the midst of the blue lightning, a palm-sized cat slowly opened its eyes. Human consciousness has the ability to self-correct. Every choice and every action will correct human consciousness. It's just like writing a function. However, humans don't write it in source code. They write it through the coding tools of behavior and environment. It's more intelligent and macroscopic. Therefore, everyone's consciousness is changing at every moment. With the same input, the answer 10 years ago was 30% likely to choose A and 70% likely to choose B. 10 years later, the answer became 90% to choose C and 10% to choose D. The electric light in Li Anping's hands slowly dissipated. A cat with gray and white fur looked at him and meowed softly, meow. The kitten looked no different from an ordinary cat. It was equally cute and agile. The animal's consciousness algorithm is too simple. It's like creating a simple artificial intelligence. Li Anping looked at the cat in front of him and casually placed it on the ground. It's difficult for me to predict what it will do in the next second with 100% accuracy, but I know all its possible choices. Because of its consciousness algorithm, its functions were compiled by me. But it's not complicated enough. The difference between it and humans is too great. Self-correction still can't be written in combination mode. Is it because the algorithm is insufficient or... The kitten ran to Li Anping's feet and rubbed against him with its body. Then, it meowed a few times. There's still something missing. What exactly is still missing? Li Anping raised his head. His eyes pierced through the roof of the Empire's library and looked at the endless starry sky. In Tianjing, thousands of people were constantly experiencing all kinds of unbelievable adventures. Countless people's choices, data, and life and death revolutions appeared in Li Anping's eyes. What exactly is missing? Just as Li Anping was still trying to perfect the second stage of matter reorganization and preparing to break into the third stage of quantum computing in the distant Codex Nation, in the Death Zone. Originally, it had been ravaged by monsters all year round. Later, it was ravaged by the battle between Li Anping, Haigram, and Gabu. Now it was almost a completely uninhabited zone. It was only after the unification of the Western continent that the Codex Nation slowly began to recover. However, because of the battle with Haigram, the Codex Nation's vitality was greatly damaged. That was why the reconstruction of the Death Zone was arranged to be done at a very late stage. However, in the depths of this uninhabited underground, countless densely packed metal bugs were continuously excavating and constructing. In a hall made entirely of metal, Shang Tian was sitting on a chair. A laptop was placed on the table in front of him. Shang Tian, who was more than 2 years old, was fiddling with his little hands as he tapped on the keyboard. Behind him, Night Beast slowly walked up. "Little Tian, the letter has been delivered." "Thank you, Uncle Night." Shang Tian turned his head and smiled at Night Beast. In the next moment, he continued to tap on the keyboard. Meanwhile, Night Beast stood behind him, silently guarding him. In less than 2 months, this little boy, who was clearly less than 2 years old, had exploded with amazing wisdom and talent. If Shang Tian was said to only be a genius before, then his actions during these 2 months were already enough to make others feel horrified, even a level 5 ability user like Night Beast wholeheartedly convinced of his abilities. Meanwhile, on the other side of the table was a youth with a buzz cut. He raised his feet and placed them on the table, the clothes on his body releasing a series of ding-dang-dang sounds. "How much longer do we have to wait? In these 2 months you only contacted this group of trash." Apart from those few robots, the others are nothing more than a group of trash. Be patient, Kadia. Shang Tian took a sip of the coffee on the table, revealing a confident smile. The underwater base of Freezing Ocean has already begun to be established. The opportunity will come soon. What exactly are you waiting for? The youth called Kadia looked at Shang Tian in confusion. If Li Anping is really like you say, advancing towards the end with large strides, we don't have the time to stay here and drink tea and chat. However, on Earth, I've already done everything I can do. Next, we need to wait for a friend. A friend? Yes, a friend. Shang Tian revealed a mysterious smile. When I see him on the news, we can set off. We'll go to World 01, we'll kill Li Anping there. Speaking up to this point, Shang Tian's eyes were already filled with resentment. A murderous aura that did not match his 2-year-old body surged out, causing Kadia to feel a chill run down his spine. The hatred and resentment contained within was so deep that it shocked even him. Just how great is the enmity between this guy and Li Anping? After a long while, the seething murderous aura in Shang Tian's eyes gradually calmed down, turning into a bone-chilling coldness. Let me put a stop to this calamity of the multiverse, and put an end to the sins of our family. Chapter 362. 3 days later, in Xia Dragonfinch's underground training ground. By Xinghe, Xia Likong, Fang Yuhuang, and Emma, a total of 4 level 5 ability users, stood together. Emma yawned and said, "Why did you call us here so early? Do you know?" "No idea." Fang Yuhuang smiled and said, "It probably has something to do with those demons. After all, when the time comes, only His Majesty will be able to deal with those demons." Demons? Emma's eyes also showed a trace of worry. She remembered the information about Haigram. The combat power he displayed was on a completely different level from that of a level 5 ability user. Are we going to have to deal with such terrifying things in the future? Emma sighed. Just do what you're supposed to do. After Bai Xinghe said this, the 4 of them did not say anything else. Currently, in the entire Pan-Continent Alliance, Bai Xinghe was the strongest level 5 ability user. After he presided over the unification of the Western continent and took over Xia Dragonfinch, his prestige grew day by day. It could be said that among the ability users, he had become the strongest after Li Anping. In the silence, the steel door of the training ground opened automatically. Li Anping slowly walked in alone. "Your Majesty." The four of them lowered their heads and greeted at the same time. Li Anping waved his hand and said, "Don't move. I'll give you something." Then, his body flashed, and he pointed at the foreheads of Bai Xinghe and the other three. With this point, the strength of the four was revealed. Because of the difference in strength, their reactions were also different. The first one to be hit was Emma. Among the four of them, her reaction was the worst, and her close-range combat ability was also the weakest. Facing Li Anping's casual point, she could not react at all and was directly hit. Emma's eyes suddenly froze. Her whole body was motionless, as if she had been frozen. Next was Xia Laikong and Fang Yuhuang. The two of them had been through hundreds of battles and were very experienced. When Li Anping pointed his finger at them, they instinctively wanted to dodge. It was not because of distrust or hostility, but it was purely a warrior's instinct when facing a sudden attack. However, even though Li Anping had casually pointed at them, his speed was too fast for them. The moment he pointed at them, a strong gust of wind blew against their faces. The two of them only felt a slight chill on their foreheads, and just like Emma, they became motionless. In the end, he pointed his finger at Bai Xinghe. Compared to Fang Yuhuang, Xia Laikong, and Emma, he was hundreds of times more experienced in battles. His control over his body, his reflexes, and his melee combat skills had all reached the peak. When Li Anping pointed at him, he already understood a fact. He could dodge, but it was not enough to dodge Li Anping's finger. Therefore, he simply did not dodge, and there was no trace of panic in his eyes. He simply allowed Li Anping's finger to touch his forehead lightly and left. After being hit by the finger, he finally understood why Emma, Xia Laikong, and Fang Yuhuang were standing there like idiots. Li Anping's finger was not an attack, but a huge amount of information. Various understandings about the 5th and 6th energy levels, mental and material understandings. There was so much content that it could be compared to a library. At this moment, Li Anping's cold voice sounded in their ears. "This is the Queen of Heaven's understanding about the 5th and 6th energy levels. There are too many things that can only be understood but not explained. Therefore, I called you here directly and injected it into your consciousness. Don't resist. Just experience it. I hope you can break through the 5th energy level." After saying that, Li Anping looked at the four people who were still standing there like idiots and left. The reason why he gave them the Queen of Heaven's understanding instead of Li Anping's energy system was that Li Anping's own energy system, from electromagnetic drive to material reconstruction, and then quantum computation, was not perfected. Moreover, other people could not use it at all. Just the computing power that was comparable to that of a supercomputer was enough to exclude almost all of the humans on Earth. After leaving the training room, the door was closed again. More than 10 level 4 ability users were waiting outside, waiting for the four people to come out. As for the four people's subordinates, Li Anping had already ordered them to temporarily take over. They must not affect the four people's understanding this time. As for Woody and Eddie, Li Anping thought about it and decided not to give them the gift immediately. Firstly, it was because the two of them had only joined for a short period of time. If they were to receive the same treatment as Bai Xinghe and Xia Laikong, it would be unfair. Secondly, it was too easy for humans to become ambitious, especially after they had obtained great power. Although Li Anping did not care if they were loyal or not, he was unwilling to destroy the high-end power of humans again. Therefore, he decided to wait for Bai Xinghe, Fang Yuhuang, Xia Laikong, and Emma to make a breakthrough before he went to Woody and Judy. Lianping took a few steps. The next moment, his body seemed to have turned into a thin mist. With a slight breeze, he left the base at a speed that was hard to be seen by the human eye. After returning to the Empire's library, Lianping no longer looked at the theoretical book. Instead, he looked at the kitten in front of him. He watched the kitten perform all kinds of actions. Occasionally, he would flick his finger a few times. Suddenly, the kitten's body trembled, and it stood up. It started to walk around on its two hind legs like a human. Ugly, Lianping said and flicked his finger again. The kitten returned to its original appearance. He was changing the cat's consciousness by modifying the atomic arrangement of the cat's brain. It meant that he was changing a very simple function into something more complicated. It was also a kind of accumulation for him to reorganize his consciousness. At this moment, Yanbei pushed open the door of the reading room and walked in. Lianping said without turning his head, "You're back from New Dongyang." "Yes." Yanbei was silent. Ever since he was heavily injured by Hygrim's gaze, he had felt his weakness even more deeply and was more eager to become stronger. After he recovered from the hospital bed, he ignored the outside world and devoted himself to training crazily. Last month, he went to New Dongyang alone and began an ascetic journey. Lianping glanced at him, and Yanbei felt that he had been seen through. He has become stronger again. Thinking of this, Yanbei raised his head and looked at Lianping. He said, "Your Majesty, I want to become stronger. Can you help me?" Lianping glanced at him coldly, then turned his gaze back to the kitten. Under his manipulation, the kitten's consciousness kept on being modified, making all kinds of complicated actions. "I can, but you should know that ordinary methods are no longer effective for you. My ability is different from yours. Your ability to collapse is a very powerful ability that is very difficult to level up. If I want to help you, the method might be more violent." Yanbei nodded seriously and said, "It's okay. I can accept any method." "Even if you die?" Yanbei was stunned. The next moment, his gaze turned resolute. "The weak don't even have the right to choose how they die in this world. If I can't become a strong person and live on, I'd rather die immediately." Lianping smiled. "All right then." His gaze turned cold, and at the next moment, he pressed his palm against Yanbei's forehead. "Then you'll have to do your best to live on." At the next moment, Yanbei's vision turned black. The Empire's library and Lianping had disappeared from his sight. What appeared in front of him once again was an incomparably vast and empty space. Everything that entered his eyes was white and empty. Lianping's voice seemed to have come from the sky, entering his ears. "This is your dreamscape. But I've already combined your physical body with your dreamscape." Yanbei lowered his head and looked at his body, then clenched his fist. He did not feel that this was a dreamscape at all. "So, any harm you receive in this dreamscape will be reflected on your body faithfully." Yanbei smiled and said coldly, "That means that if I die here, I'll really die, right?" "That's right. In this dreamscape, you'll meet stronger and stronger opponents. In this environment, other than yourself, you can't rely on anything else." At the next moment, countless particles appeared in front of Yanbei. They kept combining and gradually formed a human figure. It was a very beautiful young man. He looked at his body that was slowly combining and opened his mouth. "Me? I'm not dead?" Ching-chan, Yanbei looked at the person in front of him. He did not expect this dead person, who had only appeared in the information, to appear again. He mumbled, "I see. You want me to deal with strong opponents in this dreamscape?" At the next moment, he had already rushed out. With a wave of his hands, a collapsed space opened up with Ching-chan's head as the center. Before Ching-chan could react, his head had already been blasted apart, and he fell to the ground. "It's over." Yanbei looked around. "Who's next?" However, at that moment, a huge white hand reached out from Qing Chan's corpse and grabbed Yan Bei. "You want to kill me the moment you come up? Are you crazy?" Following Qing Chan's words, the huge hand exerted force and squeezed Yan Bei into a pile of minced meat. Qing Chan's ability was giant transformation. After reaching the 5th level, his unbelievably beautiful body was not his real body at all. At the next second, Yan Bei opened his eyes again. "Me? I'm not dead?" Qing Chan mumbled. Yan Bei rushed towards Qing Chan again. Lianping shook his head. He did not tell Yan Bei the truth about this dreamscape. Yan Bei would not really die here. Every time he died, his dream would end, and he would enter the next dream and repeat until he won. Then, he would fight the next enemy. For Yan Bei, he would think that he was struggling between life and death every time and then won. Just like that, he would constantly stimulate his potential in life and death situations. However, this method still had its shortcomings. For level 4 ability users, Lianping could only modify their dreams. He could not change their memories as he wished. Therefore, he could only do this once. A person's mind and body had their limit. If they still could not break through after reaching their limits, they might never be able to break through. Chapter 363. Yan Bei wasn't the only one working hard. The Royal Academy of Sciences in New Dongyang City. 30 floors underground. Inside a room made entirely of silver-white metal, Golden Light was panting as he paced back and forth, his upper body bare. The golden aura around his body kept expanding, and he had transformed into a blonde man. Golden Light, who was in his transformed state, was 10 times stronger and faster than before. Even so, he still stumbled with every step he took, as if he had just learned how to walk. Next to Jin Guang was a girl with short blue hair. She was holding the original sword of Tatsuka that should have been in by Xinghe's hands. Seeing that Jin Guang was having trouble walking, she shouted, "My lord, should we lower the gravity?" "No need." Jin Guang turned down the girl's suggestion and continued to move under the restraint of the multiple times gravity. After walking for more than half an hour, his steps became steadier and steadier. He had gotten used to the change in gravity. During this time, sweat kept dripping from his body and almost turned the ground under his feet into a small pool. Feeling the weakness coming from all over his body, Jin Guang took out a bottle of white reagent from his waist pocket and gulped it down. It was the immortality potion, refined by the Royal Academy of Sciences. It could greatly increase a person's vitality, but Jin Guang used it to replenish his stamina and energy. Of course, it was also because the Royal Academy of Sciences technology had improved greatly. The refinement of the immortality potion wasn't as difficult as it used to be. Jin Guang relied on the immortality potion to replenish his energy and trained under the multiple times gravity in his transformed state. He had been in this state for 5 days. He had never tried to maintain his transformed state for such a long time. He was trying his best to activate the potential in his body. But even with the immortality potion, his stamina was greatly depleted. But when he thought of Yan Bei and how that guy defeated him in 30 seconds on the first day he came back from New Dongyang City, he felt a sense of humiliation from the bottom of his heart. "It's not enough." Jin Guang turned his head and said to the blue-haired girl, "Double the gravity. But, just do as I say. I'll take responsibility if anything goes wrong." The blue-haired girl nodded helplessly. She mobilized her aura and increased the output of gravity in the sword of Tatsuka again. Golden Light let out a muffled groan as the sudden increase in gravity pressed him to the ground, forcing him to kneel on one knee. "My lord, are you all right?" The blue-haired girl immediately became nervous and was about to cancel the Tatsuka sword's ability. However, he saw that Jin Guang had already raised a hand to stop him. "Don't stop. That's it." The muscles all over Jin Guang's body began to tremble. The golden chi surged once again, and he actually stood up slowly, trembling all over. That's the feeling. When Golden Light maintained his transformed state for more than 12 hours, he felt extremely tired. When the time passed 24 hours, a feeling that he had reached his limit kept pressuring him, telling him to stop. However, he did not stop and chose to continue. The feeling of being on the verge of collapse filled the insides of his body. It was not until the 5th day that Jin Guang noticed the difference. His body began to change, and an unprecedented feeling filled his heart. It was as if the Nianqi in his body was fusing with his body, and the burden of the transformation seemed to be lessening. On the same night, Su Xining quietly climbed out of bed and walked toward the Central Park. The entrance test for the Academy City had already ended. Jason was tested to have mutated abilities, and Su Xining was deemed to be an incompetent person, just like the previous time. She had also been eliminated from the incompetent entrance test. Right now, the lady who had spoken to him on the tall building had become his last hope. Su Xining climbed over the wall and walked carefully on the grass in the Central Park, heading in the direction of the artificial lake. Could what she said be true? Am I an ability user or not? Right at this time, a palm slapped him on the shoulder, giving him a big fright. Ah! He turned around and saw a young man standing behind him. He retracted his hand with an embarrassed look on his face. Sorry for scaring you. The young man smiled. You're also going to the artificial lake? Su Xining nodded warily. He suddenly recalled the barefooted lady's words. He was not the only one who had come. Nie Xian, who was standing in front of him, smiled and nodded. Then we're classmates from now on. Let's go together. Therefore, Su Xining followed Nie Xian to the artificial lake in a daze. Along the way, Su Xining, who was not scheming at all, was easily exposed by Nie Xian in just a few sentences. Then they saw two young ladies at the artificial lake. The moment they saw Li Anping, whether it was Nie Xian or Su Xining, their breathing became a little heavier. All right, let's start then, Li Anping said to Su Xining and Nie Xian after seeing them arrive. Nie Xian and the other young lady, who looked to be in her teens, sat down cross-legged and closed their eyes. Su Xining asked, at a loss, "What do I need to do?" Being so close to the young lady made him feel a little uncomfortable. Do according to this. Before she finished speaking, a piece of paper had already floated into Su Xining's hands. What was recorded on it was something called the Diamond Spiritual Cultivation Method. It was a method to train spiritual power that the Heavenly Queen had summarized. Although it was only the most basic part, it was already very profound for the three people in front of him. Immediately, the three of them slowly cultivated under Li Anping's guidance. Under the scan of his spiritual power, Li Anping saw the state of their cultivation, the changes in the human spirit and the operation of consciousness. Every bit of it was recorded. The entire human world was like a fully wound machine. Under Li Anping's will, it developed at an unprecedented speed. All kinds of technology that far surpassed this era entered people's lives one after another. With the help of the warp gate, the entire world was tightly connected. Controllable nuclear fusion and the vacuum zero-point energy extractor that Li Anping created later solved almost all of the energy problems. The technology obtained from the God King and the various engineering robots developed by the Royal Academy of Sciences had gradually liberated humans from physical labor. There had never been a moment when superpowers had truly become something that all humans were familiar with. It even appeared in many people's daily lives. 3 months after the Western continent's unification war, the global economy had grown by 20%. Because of the liberation of productivity and the inexhaustible supply of energy, social welfare had greatly increased, and people no longer had to rush about for work. Human society gradually entered an unprecedented golden age. Some people called it the Golden Age. Codex Nation, under the frozen ocean. The underwater world that was close to 12,000 meters deep was still silent. However, countless sparkling lights illuminated this land of death, as if it was daytime. At this time, the entire area around the warp gate was completely covered by a large number of fortifications. The warp gate was directly exposed to the bottom of the sea. Because the sea water that was more than 12,000 meters deep was naturally the best defense. Under this kind of pressure, most demons with abilities below level 5 would not be able to survive in this environment. Electromagnetic waves, infrared rays, sonar, and other detection devices covered the entire warp gate and its surroundings. Once something came out of it, it would send a signal to Tianjing, the Xia Dragonfinch's headquarters. Meanwhile, the psychic incarnation directly sat at the bottom of the sea 50 meters in front of the warp gate. The psychic energy on its body also completely covered the warp gate, always maintaining a detection posture. Right in this deathly silence, Higram, who was imprisoned in the psychic incarnation's chest, spoke. Li Anping, we've already said everything that needs to be said. When exactly are you planning on letting us go? Seeing that the psychic incarnation had no intention of replying, Hygram's eyes revealed a trace of ruthlessness, shooting a look towards Gabe. In the next moment, a huge explosion appeared within the psychic incarnation, almost making his entire body swell. Self-destruct. Li Anping did his best to control the explosive force within his body so that it didn't leak out. He didn't expect that level 5 ability user named Gabe to actually self-destruct. Meanwhile, the power of his self-destruction far exceeded his expectations, far greater than Gabe's own fighting strength. Meanwhile, the current psychic incarnation was already far too weak compared to Li Anping's original body. Once this wave of explosive force broke through his body, it would most likely turn the surrounding base into ruins. The psychic incarnation had no choice but to use all of its strength to suppress this explosive force within its body. However, even though it was a bit unexpected, this wave of explosive force would only delay Li Anping for 2 or 3 seconds at most. However, in the next moment, red light erupted from Hygram's body. Borrowing the power of Gabe's self-destruction, he actually directly broke through the psychic incarnation's restriction, rushing straight towards the surface of the sea. You're courting death. 2 seconds later, the psychic incarnation suppressed the explosive force. Its entire body turned into a streak of black light, also rushing out. The two's departure caused the entire seabed to become silent once more. Only the various types of equipment still faithfully carried out the original plan. They scanned the surrounding seabed situation over and over again. Because the entire underwater base's environment was too vile, and because of the psychic incarnation's protection, there weren't any living people. Everything was monitored by machines and Li Anping. Not long after the psychic incarnation left, a foot reached out from the world-crossing gate. It looked like a human's foot, but despite stepping on the seabed 12,000 meters deep, it was completely unharmed. In the next moment, a person made his way out from the world-crossing gate. Chapter 364. It was a man who walked out from the portal. He looked no different from an ordinary earthling, but he was wearing tattered linen clothes that looked like some kind of prison uniform. There seemed to be a thin layer of membrane on the outside of his body, which prevented the water pressure from acting on him directly. When he saw the underwater world before him, as well as the underwater bases created by the Federation, a curious expression appeared on his face. What a strange metal shell! I can't sense any magic waves, but there's light. Creature detection. There aren't any living creatures inside. However, just then, 3 engineering robots were launched from the base, and they swam toward the prisoner's location at high speed. Puppets? I still can't sense any magic waves. What a strange world. As the engineering robot approached him, a net shot out from the robot's body towards the prisoner. Foolish living creatures. Are you trying to challenge the mage's authority? The prisoner raised his palm, and endless cold air spread out from his body. In an instant it gushed toward the seabed in all directions. It was as if an ice lotus had bloomed, freezing all the buildings within a radius of 1,000 meters, including the engineering robots. Seeing that the enemies in the surroundings had been eliminated, the prisoner-like man broke into a smug smile. In the next moment, he soared into the sky, rising toward the surface of the sea. In the process of rising, his figure gradually became transparent until it gradually disappeared. The moment the man appeared, Li Anping, who was far away in Tianjing, had already received the news. The information was transmitted to his mind through electromagnetic waves, and then he restored it into a three-dimensional image before his eyes. Why would a human come from the White Land? Li Anping frowned. Is it a demon that looks like a human? Is it a coincidence that Higram lured his psychic energy clone away at this moment? Or was it premeditated? Li Anping heard the man's voice again. It was the last voice recorded by the surveillance equipment, but he could not understand what the other party meant. Is this your language? What does it mean? Li Anping thought about it, but unfortunately, there were too few clues and he couldn't come to a conclusion. Right then, Bai Xinghe's image appeared before him. My lord, we've lost contact with the portal. Should we send someone over? There's no need for that for now. Once we capture Higram, I'll send my psychic incarnation over first. Li Anping ordered. He looked at the prisoner in the three-dimensional image and said coldly, "Find this guy who came out of the portal first and capture him." Understood. The last image in Li Anping's image was the base that was gradually being destroyed. He frowned and thought, I was too careless. The bottom of the sea is not suitable for other people to fight in. I thought that it would be enough to let the Nianxi clone guard the base. I didn't expect that I would still make a mistake. It seems like I need to increase my strength in this area. At the same time, the 30 prophetic satellites that surrounded the entire Earth were in full operation, and they began to search for the man in the prison uniform that appeared on the screen. The man's face appeared in the police, the internet, and the news. However, the government did not reveal the man's real identity. Instead, they said that he was an aptitude user who was on the run and was highly aggressive. North of the Law State Death Zone. Shang Tian looked at the new wanted poster that appeared on the internet and smiled. Here's the chance. Let's go, Kadia. Let's go to world number 1. Is it finally done? Kadia stood up and stretched. His whole body made clanking sounds. But what about Li Anping? His psychic incarnation might return to the portal at any time. So, we have to hurry. Shang Tian typed quickly on the keyboard and called over the few team members that he had chosen. Now that Li Anping has temporarily lost the surveillance of the portal, as long as we seize this opportunity to go in, he won't know that we've already gone over. I'm afraid we won't encounter such a coincidence again in the future. A few minutes later, Shang Tian, Kadia, and more than a dozen men and women had already set off toward the location of the portal. On the other side, the man who walked out of the portal had arrived at a small town in the north of the Lost State after a few hours of flying. Looking at the very prosperous town in front of him and the buildings made entirely of reinforced concrete, the man remained invisible and quietly sneaked in. In a house, he glanced at the body at his feet. It was a blonde woman, but at this moment, she had fallen to the ground with a pale face. Her body was still emitting bursts of cold air. Next to the woman, a man with the same blonde hair was kneeling. He was trembling all over as he looked at the man who looked like a prisoner. Please, don't kill me. The money is in the safe. You can take whatever you want. The prisoner glanced at him uninterestedly. It's not the common language, nor is it the imperial language. Is it the unique language of the natives here? There's no other way. He lifted a finger, and a white light shot out from his fingertip, flying toward the blond man's forehead. Try language proficiency. At the next moment, the light touched the blond man's forehead and then returned to the man's palm, disappearing. With this, he realized that he could understand what this native was saying. Shut up. The blond man spoke up once again, this time in the Law States language fluently. I'm not interested in your so-called wealth at all. He stroked his chin and said to the blond man, Native, what's your name? Henry, Henry said with a trembling voice. Each time he saw the nanny's corpse on the ground, a hint of terror would flash in his eyes. You can call me Lord Jonah, the man named Jonah said. The man who called himself Jonah said, Now, I'm a little hungry. Help me get something to eat first. I understand. Henry stood up, feeling a little apprehensive. Then he headed toward the kitchen. In his heart, Jonah had already become a strange ability user. Damn it. Shouldn't all ability users have been accepted into the various academies? Where did this lunatic come from? Although this was what Henry thought, when he turned and saw that the other party had disintegrated the nanny's corpse into pieces that were hard to be seen by the naked eye, the terror in his heart became even more intense. Jonah turned and looked at Henry, whose expression was filled with terror. He smiled eerily. Henry, I'm already very hungry. You don't want me to eat one of your arms, right? I got it. I'll get something to eat for you right away. Henry walked quickly to the fridge. In any case, I'll just get him something to eat first. Taking a look at the things in the fridge, he asked Jonah, Sir, can you eat instant noodles? Instant noodles? What's that? As Jonah spoke, he looked at the lights on the ceiling with a curious gaze. Anything. Just a set of instant noodles. When Henry brought a bowl of instant noodles to the living room, he saw that Jonah was quickly pressing the switch on the wall. He looked at the flashing lights above his head and seemed to be deep in thought. Interesting trick. Seeing Henry bring the bowl of instant noodles over, he twitched his nose. It smells good. After tasting a mouthful of instant noodles, he revealed a delighted expression. Not bad, not bad. This instant noodles tastes good. Looking at the other party eating the instant noodles happily, Henry thought to himself, Is this guy from the countryside? However, what Jonah did next seemed to confirm his guess even more. When Henry explained to Jonah that the toilet bowl in the toilet could draw out water an unlimited number of times, Jonah's eyes revealed obvious disbelief. Mortal, are you trying to deceive a mage? Jonah pointed at the toilet bowl and said, This thing doesn't have any magic waves. How can it create water out of thin air? Henry tried to explain the water pipe, water pressure, and water valve to him. However, even he himself was not very clear about the theory behind it. Naturally, it was impossible for him to explain it clearly to Jonah. However, after Jonah tried to draw out the toilet bowl dozens of times, he had to admit that this mortal before him was not deceiving him. Interesting and foolish aborigines. Have you all invested all your energy into how to enjoy yourselves? Faced with Jonah's strong martial prowess, Henry could only choose to secretly despise this country bumpkin before him. After studying the water pipe, circuit, lights, fridge, and gas stove in the house, Jonah changed into Henry's pajamas and lay down on the sofa. He thought, what a bunch of aborigines who are greedy for pleasure. He then touched the soft sofa and the silk pajamas he was wearing. What a soft chair! And this shirt, such exquisite craftsmanship. I'm afraid that even the Emperor's chief tailor doesn't have such craftsmanship. However, after studying the installations in Henry's house for a while, Jonah recalled the reason for his visit. However, after asking a few times, he realized that Henry had never heard of the Holy Roland Empire, the Mages Guild, or Carmel. Henry was even more clueless about the magic that Jonah was most concerned about. It was as if magic had only appeared in novels and dramas here. Seems like this continent is very far away from the Empire. To think that there isn't even any knowledge of magic here. What a remote place. However, thinking that this place was still in an ignorant period without magic, Jonah's worries disappeared. Since there aren't any mages on this continent, then I don't have to worry about anything. However, I can't just listen to the words of this mortal. Perhaps the mages here are hermits, and his level isn't high enough to come into contact with them. Maybe I can meet their king first. Since no one here knows me, I can just make up a story. If there are mages here, then I'll join them. If there aren't any mages, hee. After thinking for a while, Jonah asked again, "Do you have a king here? If I want to meet the king, what should I do?" Jonah raised his chin high and said with a unique pride, "As the representative of the Holy Roland Empire's Mages Guild, I request to meet the king of the most powerful country on this continent." Is this guy crazy? However, Henry naturally wouldn't say it out loud. He thought for a while and said slowly, "If you insist on talking about a king, there is one. However, I'm afraid it won't be easy to meet him. I need to talk to the police. Lord Jonah, can you allow me to make a call?" Chapter 365. Phone call? What's that? Under Henry's explanation, Jonah nodded and said, "I understand. It's something like a communication spell. This means that you're going to contact your officials and get them to pass on the message to the king?" Yes. Henry nodded. "But with my status in our country, it might be more difficult to alarm the king." Jonah smiled and said casually, "It's fine. At most, we'll just look for them one by one. Quickly go and make the call." Hearing that, Henry immediately became elated. "This lunatic, I need to call the police quickly." He walked to the landline and picked up the microphone, dialing the numbers 112 and 112. Jonah looked at Henry curiously. At the same time, he opened up his ears and listened carefully to the voice coming from the phone. After 2 beeps, a clear female voice picked up the call and said, "Hello, please speak." "Hello, I'm here." He threw a glance at Jonah, who was listening curiously to the female voice coming from the phone. Henry nodded and said hesitantly, "There's a magician who wants to meet King Lianping." "Magician?" The lady was clearly stunned. However, at the next second, her tone was filled with displeasure. "I'm sorry, please don't joke around. Otherwise," Henry said anxiously, "I'm not joking. A beeping sound came from the phone. The other party had clearly hung up the call. Henry let out a bitter laugh and looked at Jonah, saying, "Sir, as we've never had a magician here before, they might find it hard to believe in the existence of magicians." Hearing that, Jonah frowned and said, "A bunch of ignorant aboriginals. To think that they dare to deny the existence of magicians." Henry was afraid that Jonah would do something out of his control, so he continued, "Sir, I can tell them that you're a metahuman. They might be able to accept this." "Metahuman? What's that?" They're people with superpowers. Some of them can breathe fire, some can fly, and some can turn invisible." Jonah asked a few more questions. After hearing Henry's explanation, he nodded proudly and said, "I understand. They're warlocks, right? I didn't expect that there would be warlocks here, even though there aren't any magicians. However, how can those barbarians who only know how to fight based on their instincts be compared to magicians?" John asked cautiously. "Then forget it, who told you natives to have no way of understanding the greatness of mages? Just say whatever you think will succeed." Henry nodded. He quickly picked up the phone and dialed 112. After the beeping sound, a clear female voice picked up the phone. Henry didn't listen to what she said and shouted directly, "Hello? I have a very powerful ability user here who wishes to meet His Majesty Lianping." Sorry. The female voice on the other end maintained a polite tone. "We can't contact Her Majesty directly. If you want to see Her Majesty, I suggest you go to Tianjing directly." When Henry heard this answer, he cursed in his heart. F***K, are you crazy for answering so seriously? Hurry up and send the police over for obstructing official business. Take this lunatic away. However, he obviously did not dare to say these words out loud. He could only say, "I don't care. You must inform His Majesty immediately. My friend is already impatient." Obviously, his problem couldn't be solved. After several failed attempts at persuasion, the other side hung up the phone again. When Henry was on the phone, Jonah's attention was focused on the phone. He was obviously very curious about how this small box with no magical waves could transmit the sound. After seeing Henry hang up the phone again, he frowned again. Failed again? How troublesome. She just said that we can go to Tianjin directly to find your king? Hearing this, Henry's heart jumped again. No, if I really bring him to Tianjin to find Her Majesty, it's too dangerous for me. I can't bring him to Tianjin. Thinking of this, Henry's heart suddenly lit up. This guy. He recalled all the words and actions of the other party since he entered the room. He thought with some uncertainty, this lunatic, could he really be a magician from the Holy Roland Empire? On the other side, Jonah had already stood up impatiently. Mortal, that Tianjin is in that direction? I'll fly you there directly. At first, Henry only thought of the other party as a lunatic, but now that he thought about it carefully, if the other party was really a magician from another world, then everything was not unreasonable. Thinking of this, he was even more unwilling to follow the other party to this muddy water and go to Tianjin. He said directly, Sir, our king's whereabouts are uncertain all year round. Even if we go to Tianjin, he might not necessarily be there. It's better to let him come to us. Just find the officers in charge of public security here. Sir, you can go through them to find your way up. All right, you can try again. At this point, Jonah swallowed his saliva and said, Is the instant noodles in that ice cave? I'll go cook another packet. Seeing that the other party went to get the instant noodles to eat again, Henry secretly scolded the country bumpkin in his heart. He picked up the phone again and dialed 112. Hello, this is Garden Street, 112, 303. We have someone who wants to commit suicide here. Hurry up and send a police officer. Yes, sir, we'll send someone over right away. On the other hand, Jonah had already taken out the instant noodles and started cooking them skillfully. When he saw water flowing out continuously from the tap and the kettle boiling the water automatically, he was once again astonished. The craftsmen from this world have really good skills. However, after saying this, he shook his head again. But to spend all your energy on these little tricks and give up on the great research of magic. As expected, you're still an ignorant and backward aboriginal. After saying that, he lowered his head and poured the boiled water into the instant noodles. Smelling the fragrance of the instant noodles, he broke into a satisfied smile. After being hungry for so long, I can finally eat something nice. Henry was not in the mood to debate who was more backward with this lunatic. He only waited anxiously at the side, hoping that the police would hurry over and arrest this lunatic. As for whether this guy was a lunatic or a real magician, Henry was not interested in that at all. 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang and Henry walked toward the door impatiently. Sir, they should be here now. I'll go and open the door. Jonah did not even turn his head. He was sitting on the sofa and slurping down his instant noodles. Henry opened the door and saw 2 police officers standing outside. He said agitatedly, He's an ability user and is very aggressive. You must be careful. After saying that, he hid behind the 2 of them. The 2 of them threw a strange glance at Henry. Then they saw Jonah, who was wearing a silk sleeping robe, coming out. He looked at the 2 of them in contempt and said, The 2 of you, bring me to your king or superior. I want the highest-ranking one. The older police officer smiled helplessly and said into the walkie-talkie, It's fine. He seems to be a lunatic. We'll come back after we've settled him. Another young policeman walked up and asked, Friend, who do you want to see? Bring me to meet the highest-ranking official you can meet. It'll be even better for the kingdom. Saying this, Jonah was afraid that these aboriginals would waste his time, so he decided to use his extraordinary powers to intimidate them. He put out a hand, and as he opened his palm, a sphere of light appeared in his palm, illuminating the entire room. However, His actions immediately raised the wariness of the two police officers. Both of them pulled out the pistols at their waists and pointed them at Jonah. "He's really an ability user." The police officers pointed their guns at Jonah and then shouted in accordance with the standards for ability user criminals. "No matter what you want to do, stop immediately. Put your hands behind your head and squat down. Also, put away the thing in your hands quickly. Otherwise, we'll be shooting." Jonah had not expected that his intimidating actions would not only fail to arouse their reverence, but also arouse their hostility. Usually, if he were to reveal an illumination spell before the commoners, wouldn't they immediately kneel down and worship him? He suddenly lifted his head to look at the lights on the roof and their language. Then he came to a realization. It seems that simple spells aren't able to make the aboriginals here submit. They are so stupid. They don't understand the greatness of magic. Thinking of this, a hint of cold light flashed in Jonah's eyes. "Mortals, it seems that I'll have to teach you what reverence is." In the next moment, as Jonah pointed out with his finger, an icicle appeared out of thin air and fell, piercing a hole in the young police officer's thigh. Seeing his colleague fall down while screaming, the older police officer immediately shouted into the walkie-talkie on his shoulder, "Damn it, it's an ability user. He injured Joey. I need backup." As he spoke, he had already removed the safety of the gun at his waist. The camera on his other shoulder was also aimed at Jonah, uploading the situation to the police network. "You damned bastard." The police officer pointed his gun at Jonah, only to see him walk toward him step by step with a disdainful smile on his face. "I said, don't move." He lowered the gun slightly, aimed it at Jonah's thigh, and fired a shot. The sudden sound of the gun and the bullet that came out of the barrel gave Jonah a fright. He felt that he had been attacked, but he did not understand how the other party had attacked with the weapon in his hand. However, the other party's attack had clearly not been able to break through the protective force field on the surface of his body. Instead, it had aroused his fury. "Commoner, you actually dare to attack a mage. I'll imprison your soul in the body of a pig and let you know how rude and childish your actions are." At the same time, the information regarding Jonah had been transmitted to the entire world at the speed of light. About 2 minutes later, the news had been delivered to Lianping, who was far away in Tianjin. "Sir, we've found him." Chapter 366. Have you found him? Lianping was standing in the clouds above Tianjin. He looked at Higram, who was being held tightly by the Nianqi clone, and transmitted his will back in the form of electric signals. "Send someone to capture him. I want him alive." "Yes, sir." Higram, who was being held tightly by the Nianqi clone, looked at Lianping's cold expression and asked fearfully, "What do you want?" He had been chased by the Nianqi clone for several hours. As his abilities had been greatly reduced and he could not replenish his energy effectively, he was still unable to shake off his opponent in the end and was captured once again. He was then sent to Lianping in Tianjin. Lianping grabbed Higram's head. Right now, Higram's body had shrunk to the size of a palm. With this, not only had his head completely sunk into Lianping's palm, but a large part of his body had also sunk in as well. On the other side, after handing Higram over to Lianping, the Nianqi clone flew in the direction of the World Crossing Gate. Lianping planned to personally imprison the Nianqi clone from now on. "Tell me why there are humans coming from the White Land and why there are humans who have come to Earth through the World Crossing Gate." Following Lianping's words, Lianping's hand gradually exerted more force, squeezing Higram's head, causing it to squeak. Under Lianping's immense strength, Higram's head felt like it would collapse at any moment. Right now, Lianping had broken through the electromagnetic drive and reached the final stage of matter recombination. His abilities were no longer the same as when he had been fighting against Higram a few months ago. Right now, his strength, agility, and stamina had all broken through the 70 mark. From around 60, his strength had reached 71. 2. His agility 72. 6. And his stamina 70. 1. At this stage, it was extremely difficult to increase each attribute point. Right now, even if Li Anping were to devour all of the several billion people on Earth, he would not be able to increase his attributes by 1. 0. On the other hand, his physical attributes at this stage had completely surpassed what humans knew about living creatures. Electromagnetic drive allowed him to grasp the essence of power, and material recombination allowed Li Anping's body to evolve rapidly. Under self-adjustment, Li Anping could maintain his body's strength at about 10 times that of an ordinary person. Of course, at this time, his strength, speed, and stamina would rapidly decline, far from the standard of 70 points. His energy consumption would also be greatly reduced. Once he entered combat mode, he would instantly undergo a transformation at the level of material recombination, allowing his body to be even denser than Hygrim's. The hardness of his skin alone would far surpass that of diamonds, titanium alloys, and other hard substances known to mankind. His internal organs, muscles, and other non-essential combat organs would all be replaced, while his nervous system would be completely replaced by electrical signals. His circulatory and respiratory systems would also be replaced by more outstanding vacuum energy pathways. Once he entered combat mode, every part of his body would become the most suitable state for combat. His physical attributes would also break through the 70 mark. As his knowledge increased, the transformation of this combat state would also become stronger and stronger. Facing Li Anping in this state, Hygrim felt as if his head was a piece of scrap metal under the immense pressure of his opponent, as if it would explode at any moment. Ah! Feeling that his head was starting to become deformed from the pressure, even Hygrim could not help but cry out in agony. He shouted, "How would I know how he came over?" Li Anping's gaze narrowed. Blue electric light flashed on his arm, and an even more terrifying pressure pressed down. A cracking sound rang out from Hygrim's head, and a hole appeared. ****. Hygrim let out a furious bellow and used his fastest speed to transmit everything he knew to Li Anping through electromagnetic waves. He's a human from another world. In the White Lands, in those places where the space-time is not very stable, there are world-crossing gates that can be opened. However, there are some places that have natural world-crossing gates. He should have come over through this way. Li Anping loosened his grip slightly, thinking, to think that there's something like this. Seems like I'll have to adjust my strategy. He glanced at Hygrim, who had become completely deformed in his palm, and said coldly, "From today onwards, you'll stay by my side. If I find out that you're more than 10 meters away from me, I'll squeeze out your brain juice and spread it on toast as jam." Li Anping's words sent a chill down Hygrim's spine. As a demon, he could not help but shiver. This guy is even more like a demon than I am. And what's with his strength? This battle prowess is comparable to a warrior who has just entered the 8th energy level. Thinking of this, Hygrim's expression became even more honest. At the very least, before the demon race attacked, he would not have any other thoughts. At the same time, in the city of the Code Nation, Jonah began his adventure to the other world. He floated in the air above the streets, surrounded by people who had been evacuated. There were also a small number of braver people who hid in the corners, using their mobile phones to take pictures. These damned aboriginals. Jonah thought of what had happened just now and felt displeased. He had originally wanted to let the police bring him to their king, but in the end, he had been brutally attacked by the other party. After he had used spells to intimidate them, the other party had become even more agitated. With no other choice, he had killed the other party. Originally, this had not been a big deal to him. It was just killing a few mortals. Which mage had not done it before? It was just that the identity of the other party's official had made him feel that it was a little troublesome. In order not to offend the mages who might exist in the other party's kingdom, he had directly used a splitting spell to disintegrate the other party's corpse into particles that were hard to distinguish with the naked eye. He had thought that the other party would not be able to find him if he had destroyed the corpse so cleanly. Who would have thought that he had only stayed in the room for a few minutes before those police officers came looking for him again? As for Henry, he had long since escaped when he had killed the police officers. After killing another 5 people, he knew that he had probably been exposed. Although he did not understand why, he still planned to change his position first. In the end, the moment he flew out of the building, he was attacked crazily by the other party again. The Aboriginals here used a type of mechanism that could shoot out metal particles to attack. The speed of these metal particles was very fast, and even he had a hard time seeing them clearly. Fortunately, their power was not great. At the very least, they were unable to penetrate the protective force field on the surface of his body. He saw that there was no one on the street. There were only countless metal boxes that were flashing with red and blue light that were heading in his direction. The Aboriginals here were sitting in the metal boxes. When they saw him, they walked out of the boxes and attacked in his direction. Countless metal particles hit the surface of his body, and it felt as if he had been bitten by many mosquitoes. A hint of fury flashed in Jonah's eyes, and he bellowed, "You lowly ants! You don't understand what you're up against." Accompanied by his furious bellow, a blue light circle that was formed purely from cold air spread out in all directions with his body as the center. In just a few seconds, it had frozen all the matter within a range of several hundred meters. A portion of the armed police officers who had gotten out of the police cars were directly frozen into ice sculptures, while another portion of them retreated quickly. Retreat. Ordinary light weapons are ineffective. The target has the ability of ultra-low temperature. Where are our ability users? Why aren't they here yet? Looking at the police officers who had been beaten to a pulp by him with just one attack, Jonah laughed out loud. Mortals, prepare to suffer the wrath of the mages. In the next moment, as a few mysterious words were spat out from his mouth, gusts of cold wind suddenly swept up in the sky. In the next moment, countless hailstones the size of human heads smashed toward the police officers and police cars that were still rushing over from afar like cannonballs. The tremendous kinetic energy caused the cars to be smashed out of shape. Ordinary police officers who came into contact with the hailstones had their bodies torn apart. The cold air contained in the hailstones caused the surrounding temperature to drop even further. It was as if they had arrived at the South Pole in an instant. "Damn it!" One of the armed police officers who had rushed over took out a rocket launcher from the car. This type of firepower, which was specially used for anti-tank attacks, was far from what the previous bullets could compare to. Originally, it was impossible for ordinary armed police officers of the law countries to be equipped with rocket launchers. However, in the past 6 months, under the rule of the Pan-Continental Alliance, the entire Earth had greatly increased their investment in the military. All the weapons and equipment were upgraded almost every day. Therefore, the rocket launcher in the armed police officer's hand had originally belonged to a certain law country's army. Now, because it was too backward, it had been eliminated and given to the armed police officers to use. On the other side, when Jonah saw a rocket launcher flying toward his position, he was stunned for a moment. Then, the corners of his mouth curled up into a sneer. "A portable ballista? Interesting, but it's so slow. I'm afraid its power isn't as great as the metal particles I can see." Therefore, he could only watch as the rocket launcher hit the protective force field on the surface of his body. Boom! It was as if a firework had bloomed in the sky. The tremendous impact sent Jonah flying. One must know that this type of rocket launcher was specially used to deal with tanks and destroy fortifications. Although Jonah's body was protected by the defensive force field and did not suffer much damage, he was still sent flying like a rubber ball and crashed into a building. His whole brain was buzzing, and he had a slight concussion. In the midst of the ruins, Jonah slowly stood up. His eyes were burning with rage. He was actually sent flying by a mortal. This was simply a great humiliation. You lowly, despicable, stupid mortals. You've completely angered a mage. At this moment, an ear-piercing sound of something breaking through the air rang out in the sky. As a fighter jet streaked across the sky above the town, 2 black figures had already jumped down from the sky. Desya Dragonfinch? Seeing such an arrogant way of making an appearance, the armed police officer holding the rocket launcher was shocked. Although he did not know why the people who came to support the incident in the Western continent were not ability users from the imaginary agency, but people from Desya Dragonfinch. However, since the ability users sent by the government had arrived, it meant that there was nothing for them to do. The ability user who caused trouble was not killed by a rocket launcher. He did not want to continue fighting with this kind of monster. Chapter 367. The 2 people who jumped down from the fighter were covered in a layer of silver-white battlesuit. This was the latest nano-armor developed by the RES. After wearing it, not only did it greatly enhance the wearer's muscle endurance and agility, it was also resistant to all kinds of impact, bullet, magnetic, explosion, high temperature and low temperature. Not only that, it was also equipped with thermal sensors, radar, thermal imaging, night vision, sonar, and other functions. It was a piece of cake to use it for tracking or stealth. Also, it was equipped with a smart medical device that could inject painkillers, hemostatic drugs, and even adrenaline when the wearer was injured, unconscious, or in need. In addition, there were a series of functions and weapons specially configured by different aptitude users, making this set of nanotechnology armor the true king of individual soldiers. Even if an ordinary person put it on, they would instantly become a mini-superhuman, let alone now that they were wearing it on the hands of 2 dragon sparrow guards. The 2 of them fell from the sky, crashing into the street like 2 meteorites. The impact of their feet created a huge crater in the ground. One of them looked up, and a red light flashed across his silver-white mask. Jonah appeared in front of him in thermal imaging mode amidst the rubble. Found the target, 120 meters in front of us. As he spoke, he took out something that looked like a flashlight from his belt. The next moment, a white light came out of the flashlight. It was a laminar plasma beam that was bound by electromagnetic force to create a lightsaber. This was a weapon that belonged to the Federation's Cobra unit, but after the RAS's modification, it became stronger and more durable. The lightsaber could fight at 20,000 degrees Celsius for 3 hours. A lightsaber formed at such a high temperature was enough to cut through most natural substances on Earth. One of the dragon sparrow guards who came to capture Jonah was Fong Haojie, who had just graduated not long ago. He pulled out the lightsaber at his waist and made a charging motion. "I'll be going first, Captain." The other dragon sparrow guard patted the dust off his body. No expression could be seen on his face because of the nano-armor. "Be careful, the target has a freezing ability above rank 4. We can't rule out the possibility that he's a rank 5 ability user." "Understood." After saying this, Fong Haojie exerted force in both his legs. His strength, which had already far surpassed that of ordinary people, reached a superhuman level under the enhancement of the nanotechnology armor's impact on his joint. With a loud boom, he was like a cannonball, turning into a black line and charging toward Jonah. Fong Haojie's ability was called voidification. He could freely control his body and the matter he came into contact with to enter a state of voidification. In this state, his body and the matter he controlled would not be affected by the real world at all. They would enter a state similar to that of a ghost. Any matter would pass through his body and would not be able to affect him. And because he was unable to be affected by matter, his entire body would move forward with the inertia from before he became intangible. For example, those that were originally falling would continue to fall. Even if they landed on the ground, they would continue to fall through the ground until Feng Haojie dispelled his ethereal state. With a dash, his entire body, the nanotechnology armor, and the light saber entered a state of blurriness. Relying on the inertia from his previous dash, he charged toward Jonah. Along the way, he ignored all obstacles and passed through them like a ghost. Feng Haojie covered the distance of 120 meters in just a breath's time. In the blink of an eye, the light saber in his hand brought about a screen of light, slashing fiercely toward Jonah. Ah! Jonah had not expected that Feng Haojie's attack would be so strange and swift. Furthermore, there were no magical waves. Feng Haojie was a completely different creature from the warlock in Jonah's memories. He only had time to cry out in surprise, and his hands shot out waves of cold air toward Feng Haojie. However, Feng Haojie's body after he became intangible was like a ghost. The violent cold air did not have any effect on him at all. He passed through Jonah's body. Then with a turn, his intangible body turned into a physical body once again. Feng Haojie's legs stomped on the ground and he came to a stop. Jonah cried out in agony, looking in horror at his right hand that had been chopped off by the light saber. When Feng Haojie passed through his body earlier, his intangible body turned into a physical body in an instant, and then it became intangible once again. It was at this moment that he had chopped off one of Jonah's hands. The defensive force field that could fend off rocket projectiles was unable to fend off the slash from the lightsaber. Feng Haojie's ability to turn intangible was also an extremely strange and powerful ability. The most important aspect of this ability was to grasp the timing between intangible and physical forms. Jonah was at a disadvantage because of the asymmetry in information. If he had been in his peak condition, he might not have been seriously injured by Feng Haojie with just one attack. Damn it, this damned aboriginal. If it wasn't for the fact that all my magical equipment had been confiscated by the guild. Although Jonah was unwilling to admit it, he had to admit that these two aboriginals already had the ability to threaten his life. I'll escape first and deal with them after I've recuperated. At the thought of this, Jonah performed a healing spell with much difficulty. Then he soared into the sky, wanting to escape. At the same time, his body gradually dissipated into the air. It was the invisibility spell. However, his invisibility spell was only a simple distortion of light. It was unable to avoid the multiple surveillance from the nanotechnology armor. Just as he soared into the sky, another dragon sparrow guard appeared behind him. The dragon sparrow guard raised his right hand, and an intense purple light covered his fist completely. As he punched out, the purple light turned into a physical existence. It was like a purple shock wave that sent Jonah crashing to the ground. It was Hansen, who had been rescued by Li Anping from the underworld. His ability was to turn physical strength into physical attack. After he punched out, he slowly descended from the sky. Then Feng Haojie dashed out toward Jonah, who had fallen to the ground. An earth-shattering furious bellow rang out from Jonah's mouth. "All of you scram!" Instantly, under the influence of a mysterious force, the water in the air turned into icicles that filled the sky. Each icicle was only the size of a thumb, but the cold air they contained was enough to freeze a small river into ice cubes. Right now, there were millions and millions of such water droplets in the air. In the Xia Long K base, the image had come to an end. Li Anping looked at Bai Xinghe and asked, "What happened after that?" "Hansen is seriously injured. However, with the protection of the nanotechnology armor and first aid, his life is not in danger," Bai Xinghe said. "Feng Haojie has the ability to turn invisible." He took advantage of the fact that Feng Haojie was in a weakened state and captured the target. However, although he managed to dodge the initial attack, he still suffered from serious frostbite when he turned into a physical form to attack. Li Anping nodded. "Take good care of them. Reward them as you deserve. Yes. Lianping raised his chin and pointed at Jonah on the screen. What do you think? It seems to be some kind of explosive method. After the target used this move, the protective force field around him disappeared. Bai Xinghe operated the remote control in his hand, and the screen switched to a small room. Jonah was locked in the room. He was wearing the white prison uniform again, with a black collar around his neck. It was a special electric shock collar made by Xia Dragonfinch. It would monitor the heartbeat and brainwaves of the wearer. Once it exceeded a certain threshold, it would release an electric current. Once the wearer's brainwaves or heartbeat continued to rise, the power of the electric current would keep increasing until the wearer died or the heartbeat and brainwaves returned to normal. Such a collar was very useful to deal with the ability users of the field class, the parasitic class, and the bloodline class. It was because when they used their abilities, their heartbeats would be under great pressure or their brainwaves would be very active. Even when the other ability users were not using their abilities, they would be shocked when they overused their brains or fought. Right now, Jonah was wearing such a collar. For a sorcerer like him who did not practice magic, and was not much different from an ordinary person, such a collar basically turned him into an ordinary person. Looking at the frustrated Jonah in the cell, Lianping asked, "Did you get anything out of him?" Bai Xinghe shook his head. "Not yet. I want to ask, Your Majesty, can you read his mind?" "I can't." Lianping replied straightforwardly. Mental power does have the ability to read minds, but this guy's head has some kind of defense mechanism. Once it's invaded by a foreign mental power, it will self-destruct if it can't defend itself. Although I may not fail if I take action, it's not worth the risk. After all, he's already in our hands. There are too many ways to get information. Bai Xinghe nodded and said, "Then, Your Majesty, do we need to use more extreme methods? I mean, after we get all the information from him, do we still need him? It doesn't matter if he's dead or alive." Killing intent flashed in Lianping's eyes. The murders he committed in the law country alone are enough for him to die 10 times over. "I understand." Inside the cell, 2 soldiers suddenly rushed in. One of them pressed down on Jonah, and the other pulled out his uninjured left hand. "What are you doing?" While Jonah was struggling, one of them injected a white reagent into his body through a syringe from his left hand. Then they left. "Poison?" Jonah sneered in his heart. "You've underestimated the willpower of a sorcerer. In order to pursue the power and knowledge of magic, we've gone through all the hardships on the road. Our willpower has been trained to be as tough as steel." However, the next moment, an intense pleasure that he had never felt before hit Jonah's body. At the same time, it was accompanied by all kinds of illusions. Jonah felt so good that he could fly. Chapter 368. A few days later, Jonah was lying on his bed and staring at the ceiling. Mucus was flowing out of his nostrils. His pupils were dilated, and his hair was standing on end. He was in a trance. The most uncomfortable thing was that something seemed to be missing from his body. He recalled the thing that the natives injected into him a few days ago. It was a very comfortable feeling. At this moment, 2 more soldiers opened the door of the cell and walked in. Behind them was Yang Guang, who was in charge of the interrogation. Since Lu Xing went to take care of the school for ability users and Bai Xinghe became the new leader of Xia Dragonfinch, Yang Guang had become the second in command of Xia Dragonfinch. This time, it was because Lianping was very concerned about the guy who had walked out of the portal that he asked him to come in person. However, Jonah only glanced at him from the corner of his eyes and did not say anything. Yang Guang did not think much of it. According to Henry's confession, they had a general understanding of Jonah's personality and background. That was why they came up with the current plan. Yang Guang took out a syringe and played with it in his hand. When Jonah saw the syringe in Yang Guang's hand, he immediately sat up. He stared at the syringe and felt the turmoil in his body. He had a vague idea about what he had been injected with, but it was useless. Although he knew that it was definitely not a good thing to be injected with such a thing, the growing turmoil in his body made him tremble. He stared at the syringe that was rolling in Yang Guang's hand. "You want it?" Yang Guang looked at Jonah's silent face and smiled. "Do you know how to use it?" He shook his chin and instructed the soldier next to him, "Teach him how to inject it." The soldier next to him took the syringe and walked to Jonah, pulling out his left arm again. Jonah wanted to resist and struggle, but the syringe seemed to have some kind of magic that crushed the last bit of struggle in his heart. The white potion was injected into Jonah's body again. He groaned and lay down on the bed. A blurred look appeared in his eyes, and he felt as if he was flying. Yang Guang looked at Jonah, smiled, and left. Over the next few days, Jonah was injected with more and more medicine every day. 5 days later, the Xia Dragonfinch's people suddenly stopped injecting. Bang! Jonah slammed his head against the wall, but compared to the pain, the numbness and turbulence in his body made him feel worse. "Give it to me." With another bang, he slammed his head against the wall again. "Give me the medicine." Bang! "Give me the medicine." Behind the screen, Yang Guang asked the guard, "How long has he been like this?" "It's been more than 3 hours. Should we stop him?" Yang Guang smiled. "It's about time. Let's go and take a look." When Yang Guang walked into the cell again, Jonah stopped slamming his head against the wall and turned to look at him. At this moment, he looked a lot more down and out compared to when he first arrived on Earth. Not only were his eyes lifeless, but he also exuded a dispirited aura. Yang Guang raised his right hand, revealing a syringe in his palm. He said the same words he said a few days ago, "You want it? Give it to me." When he saw the syringe, Jonah roared and rushed forward, wanting to snatch the syringe from Yang Guang's hand. However, before he could get close, he was kicked back by the soldier next to Yang Guang, and he fell to the ground. Being kicked back by a mortal, if it were the old Jonah, he would have been furious, but now he just quickly raised his head, his face full of snot and tears. He looked at Yang Guang and said, "I beg you, give me the medicine." Yang Guang looked at Jonah coldly, stepped on him, and waved the syringe in his hand in front of him. "Scum, you want this, don't you? Just answer a few of my questions. What do you want to ask? Where are you from?" Jonah struggled for a while, but his inner strength was soon shattered by the turmoil in his body. "Holy Roland Empire." After saying this, Jonah's heart revealed a trace of sorrow. His pride as a mage seemed to have been torn to shreds at this moment, and a teardrop uncontrollably dripped from the corner of his eye onto the floor. Yang Guang smiled. "Very good. Next question, what is the magic you speak of?" "Codex Nation, under the frozen ocean." His psychic incarnation was building the underwater base here by himself. Although the psychic incarnation couldn't store electromagnetic force in its body and couldn't achieve the ability of the main body to reassemble matter, it still built very quickly with its superhuman speed and strength. In just a few days, the underwater base had basically been restored to its original state. However, this was only the beginning. Lianping had originally planned to wait for some time and wait for the RES to perfect some of the technology before building the outpost base on the opposite side of the portal, at the location of the Land of White. At least this way, the battlefield could be placed on the Land of White without endangering Earth. However, with Jonah's appearance now, this plan was disrupted. Lianping planned to spend some time to take a look at the Land of White, and then start building the outpost base near the portal on the opposite side of the portal. As for the underwater base, the location of the portal would be enclosed in the base, and then a warp gate would be built so that the human army could drive straight in. While he was building, Yang Guang delivered a report about Jonah. "Sir, according to his testimony, he comes from a continent called Mondo. This continent has about 20 or so countries. This Jonah comes from an empire called Saint Roland, which is also one of the most powerful countries on the Mondo continent. Their level of civilization is about the same as our Middle Ages, and they mainly rely on animal power. I've already sent you the relevant information about the situation on the continent and the countries that Jonah knows. While speaking, Yang Guang clicked open a document on the computer. According to Jonah, he was originally on the run and accidentally entered a portal. That was how he arrived at the Land of White. Then, he entered another portal and arrived at Earth. Right now, he still thinks that he's on a different continent of the same world. In their world, there is a supernatural power called magic. Magic is divided into 10 levels, from the most basic illumination to the 10th level time stop. This document contains all of Jonah's known spells and their respective effects. Li Anping glanced at it and heard Yang Guang continue. These magic, according to their classification, are divided into destruction, defense, transformation, arcane, prophecy, necromancy, life, and alchemy. There are a total of 8 major factions. In addition, there are supernatural powers called druids, warlocks, knights, and so on this continent. However, among all the supernatural powers, the power and influence of mages is still the greatest. Li Anping nodded and asked, "Then how do their power levels compare to the ability users on our side?" "It's hard to say." Yang Guang frowned. "There is too little information about mages. According to Jonah's performance and testimony, we can only make a rough judgment. Mages have a total of 4 levels. According to the difference in magic power and the number of spells they have mastered, they are divided into apprentices, inferior mages, superior mages, and sorcerers. Jonah is a superior mage. According to his performance, his destructive power is close to that of some 5th-level ability users, and even surpasses it. However, his performance in other aspects is too poor. However, according to what he said, if he is fully equipped, his power will increase greatly. According to the information he provided, we made a rough estimate. Because mages have mastered different magic powers, their overall abilities are stronger than ability users. This is especially true for superior mages and sorcerers. When they are well prepared, their destructive power and escape ability are very shocking. They are more difficult to deal with than most 5th-level ability users. Following that, Yang Guang continued to report for more than 3 hours. After all, there was too much information about a continent. The power of magic, the approximate number of sorcerers, the strength of each country, and the supernatural power of magic itself, and so on. This was when most of the information had already been received by Li Anping through reading. It was a good thing that Jonah was a mage and had a lot of knowledge, which was why he could bring them so much information. Just as Li Anping was seriously listening to Yang Guang's report on magic, the psychic energy incarnation had already rebuilt the entire underwater base. The portal that had originally stood on the seabed sand was now completely wrapped up by the base. The surrounding seawater had been completely removed, and the entire space was in a metal hall. More than 100 meters away from the portal, in the same metal hall, was the warp portal that Li Anping had created. In addition, there were various engineering robots that were continuing to build various living facilities, monitoring devices, and firepower systems. Li Anping's main body continued to listen to Yang Guang's report, while the psychic energy incarnation walked step by step towards the portal, and then stretched its head out. It felt as if it had passed through some kind of membrane. What appeared in front of the psychic energy incarnation was a vast expanse of white land that stretched as far as the eye could see. The ground was completely made up of white sand, and a bright sun hung in the sky, emitting endless light and heat. However, these weren't what Li Anping was most concerned about. What he was most concerned about was that directly in front of his head, about 300 meters away, there was a dark blue portal that stood there quietly. Recalling what Higram had said, Li Anping frowned. So that's how it is. To think that a portal would naturally form at such a time and place. The two portals that stood quietly on the land of white symbolized two completely different and unfamiliar civilizations that were about to launch an unprecedentedly huge collision. Chapter 369. In an ordinary village in the Mondo continent. The originally quiet and peaceful village was now shrouded in flames that soared into the sky. Dozens of corpses of women and children were piled up in the center of the village square. Kadia grabbed a teenager and walked to Shang Tian, who was in front of the pile of corpses. He asked, "Is it him?" Shang Tian looked back and shook his head. Kadia laughed grimly and pierced the teenager's chest with the short sword in his hand. Then, he threw the corpse on the ground. At this moment, both Shang Tian and Kadia were wearing coarse clothes. They looked like they were in a medieval movie that was being played on a set. Apart from them, there were more than 10 men and women who were also wearing coarse clothes. They seemed to be searching for something in the village. Everyone in the village, from the residents to the chickens and ducks, had been killed by them. Night Beast suddenly shouted, "Found him!" Then, he grabbed a teenager who looked to be in his teens and asked young Shangtian, "Little Tian, is this him?" Shang Tian glanced at the young man and walked forward. Suddenly, he pulled open the young man's collar and saw a blue pendant hanging around his neck. He smiled, "It's him." Then, he nodded at the night beast beside him. Then, the night beast stabbed out with a finger that was imbued with psychic energy and pierced through the back of the night beast's head. "Okay, is this the country kid you wanted us to find?" Kadia said impatiently. "Just for us to kill him? Of course it's not that simple." Shang Tian said to a girl who was walking over, "Dong use nanoworms to modify my body. Modify it to look like him." The beautiful girl with a cold face standing beside him was Dong the divine king's maid in the past. She later brought Tian Haowen to Tyrol. At this moment, she still looked the same as before. However, she had changed into a coarse dress like a medieval woman. After hearing Shang Tian's words, she looked at the teenager's corpse on the ground and then at Shang Tian. "Your body sizes are too different. If you use nanoworms..." "I know, so I don't want to disguise myself. I want to modify. Every part of my body will be modulated to look like him." Shang Tian looked at Dong and said, "Not only can I impersonate him, but I can also strengthen my physique in all aspects. I know that with your technology you can do it." Dong frowned and said, "Give me 3 days. I will set up a simple operating room near here. I'll help you with the reconstruction surgery." "Thanks." Shang Tian smiled. "Also, I want to strengthen my muscles and bones and simulate the nerve plexus. This will be helpful for my magic practice." Dong looked at him strangely, as if she hadn't expected him to know so much about her technology. Then, Shang Tian looked at the other men and women around him and said, "Now that the matter here is over, let's follow the plan." In the next moment, the dozen or so men and women scattered in all directions. They followed Shang Tian's instructions and went to ancient ruins, battlefields, and secret realms in the Mondo continent to collect all kinds of secret treasures, divine artifacts, and lost spells. They also gathered some powerful creatures through information from Shang Tian. An unprecedented plundering of the Mondo continent was about to begin. Shang Tian, Kadia, the Night Beast, and Dong would use their modified bodies to impersonate a young man. They would meet his father, who even he didn't know about. The most powerful individual on the Mondo continent, the demigod Dionysus. Shang Tian would replace this young man, who would shock the Mondo continent in the future. After meeting Dionysus, he would receive unprecedented resources and enter a period of rapid growth. He would also have the right to speak in all the countries on the Mondo continent. On the other side, after Li Anping discovered the existence of the magic world, the entire human society was mobilized. The leaders of the various countries had already been informed by Li Anping of the existence of the demons and the White Land. Now, the so-called magic world had appeared. Therefore, all kinds of information about the magic world were sent to their hand. Very soon, they came up with a series of plans and waited for Lianping's choice. Lianping didn't accept the suggestions of those who tried to form an alliance or send troops to conquer the magic world. He planned to build human outposts in the White Land and the bottom of the sea. At the same time, he chose a dozen or so people to form an expedition team and infiltrate the magic world to see what the situation was like. For example, the environment, whether ordinary humans could survive there, and whether the structure of the humans there was different from that of humans on Earth. He also wanted to know the strength of the magic world's army, the relationship between the various countries, and so on. He couldn't just listen to Jonah's side of the story. After all, he was just one person. There was a lot of information that he didn't know, or what he knew might be wrong. Faced with a foreign world and a foreign civilization, Lianping planned to be more cautious. Therefore, he planned to send out an expedition team and gather an army to be on standby. With the existence of the Space Warp Gate, as long as the army was gathered, they could pass through the Space Warp Gate and reach the Mondo continent at any time. In the palace's study, the pale-faced Jonah was brought in by Yang Guang. Lianping glanced at him and said to Xia Likong, "That's all for the human armed forces. Be on standby and be ready to attack." "I understand." Xia Likong nodded and left the study. Before he left, he glanced at Jonah. Obviously, he was very curious about this legendary mage. As Lianping's subordinates, the human armed forces were the third largest ability user organization after Xia Dragonfinch and the Imaginary Service. They were mainly prepared for large-scale wars. Most of them were domain-type ability users. The goal of their training was also mainly lethality and coordination. In terms of one-on-one combat and small-scale group battles, they might not be as good as Xia Dragonfinch and the Imaginary Service. However, once they cooperated with the army and fought a battle of more than 10,000 people, they would be far more useful than the latter two. After all, the human armed forces' weapons were already very powerful. Now, under the lead of the RES and Lianping, their weapons were becoming more and more advanced. In the face of such an army, even a rank 5 ability user would not be able to completely ignore it. Yang Guang bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, he is Jonah." Jonah glanced at Lianping. The latter looked like a normal person. Compared to the king in front of him, the incredible skyscrapers he saw along the way attracted his attention more. Lianping didn't mind Jonah's rudeness. He waved his hand and said to Yang Guang, "All right, you can go first. I want to talk to him alone." Jonah looked at Lianping and Yang Guang strangely. He didn't expect them to dare to talk to him alone. He quickly thought of the collar around his neck and understood. Right now, as long as he had the slightest intention to attack or release magic, the electric current released from his neck would knock him out. On the other side, Lianping looked at the silent Jonah and said, "I called you over this time mainly because I want to see magic." "Oh right." Lianping looked at the collar around Jonah's neck and said, "You can't release magic with this thing, right?" With a snap of his fingers, the collar broke into two and fell to the ground. "All right, just cast a spell for me to see." Jonah looked at Lianping in disbelief. Then, he touched his neck. The collar that had kept him captive like a puppy had actually disappeared just like that. In the next moment, he looked at Lianping with a crazed expression on his face. Those traces of savagery made him look like a demon from hell. He first casually cast an illumination spell. A spot of light appeared in his palm, and his body indeed didn't receive any electric shocks. He turned his head and looked at Lianping. Mortal, you've made the stupidest decision of your life." In the next moment, a sudden burst of cold air, carrying the resentment that Jonah had accumulated during this period of time, rushed fiercely toward Lianping. Chapter 370. Feeling the gentle body in his arms, Li Anping scanned it with his mind force field. He was already clear about Li Qian's current physical condition. Although Li Qian didn't train as hard as Jin Guang and Yen Bei, with the resources from Xia Dragonfinch, such as the Immortality Potion, Function Enhancer, and Sword of 10 Strikes, she had reached the 3rd level. Li Anping thought for a bit and rubbed Li Qian's back. She was like a kitten, making light noises. Li Anping whispered in Li Qian's ear, Lu Feng will go with the expedition team to the Mondo continent to collect information. After he leaves, you can take over the work of the intelligence department for him. But I've never done such a thing, Li Qian said without confidence. Although her position in Xia Dragonfinch was very high, she had never been a leader with real power. She only used her ability to monitor others. Li Anping stroked Li Qian's hair and looked at her face. He said slowly, You are the person I trust the most. From now on, be my eyes and ears. After hearing Li Anping's words, Li Qian's heart was filled with excitement. She nodded firmly and said, Okay. The current intelligence department had been integrated by Momo's central computer. Everything had a detailed set of rules and regulations. The department's dependence on the quality of the leader had been minimized. The most important thing was the degree of loyalty. Moreover, Li Anping knew that Li Qian didn't have much talent in developing abilities or fighting. Being in charge of intelligence was more suitable for her. He smiled and said, Then from today onwards, you can also live in the palace. There is a warp gate that leads directly to the base. It's very convenient. Okay, I'll listen to you. Li Qian lowered her head and felt her cheeks become hot. Li Anping let go of Li Qian and snapped his fingers. A spark of electricity appeared on his fingertip. As the electromagnetic signal was transmitted, Xiao Xuesu and the others who were near the study received the news. When they walked in, Li Anping said, Arrange a room for Li Qian. She will live in the palace from today onward. Xiao Xuesu and the others looked at Li Qian with jealousy in their eyes. Although they had been in charge of taking care of Li Anping's daily life in the palace, they were his personal maids and personal secretaries. However, as Li Anping grew stronger and stronger, his body structure became more and more different from that of a human. He didn't need to eat or sleep anymore. His brain's memory and calculation ability were better than a computer. Xiao Xuesu and the others rarely talked to Li Anping. After Li Qian left, Hygram's head slowly poked out from under the table. He looked at Li Anping with bad intentions and said, You're lying to this female? Li Anping looked at Hygram. With just a glance, Hygram's head seemed to have been hit hard. He screamed and fell to the ground. A huge crack appeared on his forehead. From today onwards, other than not appearing in front of others, you are not allowed to say a word without my orders. Just like that, Li Qian stayed in the palace and slowly took over the work of the intelligence department from Lu Feng. On the other hand, the humans had also begun their preparations for the world of magic. Xia Dragonfinch's hospital ward. With a slap, Hansen withdrew his hand in embarrassment. The nurse scolded him for being a hooligan and left immediately. Fang Haojie turned his head and pretended he didn't know this person. Hansen quickly threw the awkwardness to the back of his mind and said to Fang Haojie, Haojie, we're really lucky this time. I heard that the VIP wards here are only for the higher-ups. This time, not only did we get a raise and a promotion, we didn't die. How lucky is that? Captain. Fang Haojie looked at Hansen. There was still a hint of depression in his eyes. Hansen smiled and said to Fang Haojie, Haojie, you rarely fail, right? Academy City's Golden Generation, first place in the graduation exam. Hansen said calmly, Before you came, there were a lot of rumors about you. Is that so? Hearing Hansen say this, Fang Haojie suddenly felt a little shy. But you have to remember, compared to success, being able to accept failure is more important. Because a person can't always succeed. He will always fail. Plus, your performance this time was already very good, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay. Fang Haojie nodded. At this moment, the door of the ward was opened. Wang Ku, who had been following Zhuomai, walked in wearing de Xia Dragonfinch's uniform. Behind him, there was a dragon sparrow guard holding something in his hand. You're Fang Haojie, right? Wang Ku saluted Fang Haojie and said with a serious face, Hello, from now on, you have been incorporated into the Pan-Continent Alliance, the SOM Special Task Force. The specific written notice will be sent to your mailbox in a moment. I'm here to inform you that you will report to the Royal Academy of Sciences in New Dongyang in 7 days. Also, Wang Ku's face showed a hint of envy. In 3 days, you will report to the palace. Fang Haojie was stunned. He still didn't understand the situation. SOM's Special Task Force? Don't worry, it's a good thing. Wang Ku glanced at Fang Haojie and left, leaving Hansen and Fang Haojie in the ward at a loss, wondering what this so-called SOM Special Task Force was for. Royal Academy of Sciences, Basement 13. Kevin returned to his lounge and took out his phone. Ever since Li Anping rescued him from the underworld, he first joined de Xia Dragonfinch. Later, because of his outstanding medical skills, he was recruited by Shirwan to work at the Royal Academy of Sciences. He glanced at the number on his phone and dialed it back. Hello, Hansen? You looking for me? Yes, I have something to ask you. Do you know about the SOM Special Task Force? I heard that it has something to do with the Royal Academy of Sciences? Yes. Kevin turned his head and looked at the notice on his desk. I've been transferred in as a medical officer. What? Hansen asked. What is that thing? One of my subordinates was transferred in as well. I've asked the leader. The leader Kevin referred to was naturally Emma, who led everyone in the underworld. Ever since they left the underworld, these survivors of the underworld still kept in contact with each other. They were basically a faction now. It should be a spy from another world. The rest is confidential, I can't tell you with my authority. Oh right, your subordinate is Fang Haojie? What's wrong? Do you know him? The guy named by His Majesty personally. He's famous now. Inside the underground training room, Goldenlight still had his blonde hair and blue eyes, but his hair seemed to be longer than before. His muscles were also thicker than before. Right now, he was shirtless and sweating profusely in front of a huge metal wall. The fist wrapped in golden psychic energy fell like a meteorite and hit the metal panel, making loud banging noises. This metal panel was made from the leftover adamantium from the sword of Tatsuka. It wasn't really made, but the adamantium that Li Anping kept after making 108 Sword of Tatsuka was stored together in this way. Only this kind of metal could withstand Goldenlight's attack so easily, without any damage. The blue-haired girl looked at Goldenlight with admiration. The sword of Tatsuka in her hand had been activated to the strongest gravity she could control. Under such a high-gravity environment, Goldenlight could still move as freely as usual. Especially since the last time he reached the limit, she found that Goldenlight had never left the transformation state. Obviously, his strength had reached an unfathomable level. At this moment, Goldenlight suddenly stopped. He let out a deep breath and picked up a towel on the ground to wipe his sweat. Just a few seconds after he stopped training, the metal door of the training room opened. Lu Feng walked in with his hands behind his back and a smile on his face. He glanced at Goldenlight's body and sighed. What a terrifying talent. Goldenlight exhaled and asked directly, "What's the matter?" Lu Feng stretched out his hand and a notice fell into Goldenlight's hand. SOM Special Operations Team, report in 7 days. Special Operations Team. Goldenlight frowned. What do you do? You've heard about the magic world, right? Lu Feng smiled. We're just going there to collect information and see if there are any strong people or things worth paying attention to. I heard that the sorcerers there are more difficult to deal with than level 5 ability users. Yes, there is such a saying. Seeing that golden light didn't mean anything, Lu Feng turned and left. Halfway through, he suddenly remembered something. Oh, right, in 3 days. His Majesty wants you to go to the palace to see him. Got it. Just after Lu Feng left, Golden Light looked at the adamantium on the wall and murmured, "Magic!" The next moment, the golden chi burst out like a volcanic eruption. The dazzling golden light filled the entire training room, making the blue-haired girl unable to open her eyes. Accompanied by an earth-shattering noise, the ground under her feet seemed to have experienced a magnitude 10 earthquake. The terrible air wave blew her whole body to the wall. When everything disappeared, she opened her eyes again. She couldn't see any adamantium, only a bottomless hole in the wall. Even if the adamantium was still intact, it had been bombarded to the depths of the ground where it was difficult to see with the naked eye. Chapter 371. Yan Bei followed behind Xiao Xuesu and slowly walked towards the palace's study. At this moment, compared to before, he seemed to have become more reserved and cold. Compared to his original sharpness, he gave off the feeling that he was no different from an ordinary passerby. It was as if even one's gaze could not stay on him, as if it was directly absorbed. He raised his head and looked around. The palace's security seemed to be tighter than before. In just a short 10 minutes, Yan Bei had already sensed the aura of at least 10 level 4 ability users. Recently, he did not know whether it was because of the establishment of the academy or the changes in the Earth's environment, but Yan Bei felt that there seemed to be more and more ability users. Level 4 ability users that were rarely seen in the past could now be seen frequently in the palace. It seems that after the first level 5 ability user was born, the growth rate of ability users has gradually increased. At this moment, Xiao Xuesu's footsteps stopped. She turned around and said, "His Majesty is waiting for you in front." Yan Bei nodded. He originally wanted to ask Xiao Xuesu if Li Anping had been staying in the study and reading recently. But after thinking about it, he decided not to. Li Anping would definitely be able to hear what he said. Although he just wanted to ask casually, when he thought about how Li Anping would just listen like that, it was not too good. After thinking about it, Yan Bei pushed open the door of the study and walked in. In the study, he could see 3 people directly. Li Anping was sitting behind the desk and reading a book. Jin Guang stood by the window and kept looking outside. Only when Yan Bei came in did he turn around to look at him. There was also a young man that Yan Bei did not know. He was sitting upright on the chair and looked very nervous. After Yan Bei came in, Li Anping raised his head and looked at the 3 of them. He said, "All right, everyone is here. Let's begin." Jin Guang also walked over when he heard that. He stood in front of Li Anping with Yan Bei and Feng Haojie. After looking at the 3 of them, Li Anping paused and said, "The 3 of you have excellent potential. It's a rare opportunity for you to join the Special Operations team this time, but it's also very dangerous." Yan Bei and Jin Guang heard that and glanced at Feng Haojie. From his psychic energy, he seemed to be a level 4 ability user. Yet, Li Anping personally mentioned that he had high potential. Yan Bei suddenly remembered a recent rumor. Feng Haojie? I wonder if the so-called void form can be hit by my collapse attack. Thinking about this, he looked at Jin Guang, who had been in his transformed state since he entered. As expected, he has also become stronger. Jin Guang glanced at Feng Haojie and turned his head away. His eyes seemed to be very pure, unlike Yan Bei's. This was also related to their different training methods during this period of time. Yan Bei faced all kinds of powerful level 5 ability users in his dream time and time again. He carefully tested the opponent's fighting style, understood the opponent's state after combining their body and ability, and collected the information that the opponent unintentionally revealed. These were all very important. Jin Guang's training did not think so much. He just kept increasing the pressure on himself, pushing his limits time and time again, pushing his strength to the limit. When Fang Haojie heard Li Anping announce his name, a trace of excitement flashed in his eyes. He felt his blood boiling. Li Anping, who was sitting behind the desk, did not care about what they thought. He just continued, "Because of this, I called you guys here today to give you guys some insurance." At this point, Li Anping took out a silver-white ring from the drawer of the desk and threw it to Fang Haojie. "You know the sword of Tatsuka, right? This is red lightning." Fang Haojie took the ring and his eyes were filled with excitement. Of course, he had heard of the 108 ten-fist swords. He had always dreamed of having one. He did not expect to not only meet Li Anping today, but also get the ten-fist sword that he had always dreamed of. While he was excited, Li Anping's voice came into his ears. The red lightning he released can basically break down most substances into their molecular state. It's considered a level 5 ability. It can make up for your void ability and lack of destructive power. But this is for you to save your life. Don't rely on him too much. Train your ability more. Thank you, Your Majesty. As Fang Haojie spoke, there seemed to be a fire burning in his eyes. It was as if he was going to burn up. Yan Bei and Jin Guang did not have any special reaction. They each had a level 5 ten-fist sword, which was a steel spear and a strength bracer. They were just a little surprised that Fang Haojie got red lightning. Li Anping did not care about them. He continued, "Other than that, I'll give each of you one last insurance." As he spoke, he stretched out a finger on his right hand. A drop of red blood flowed out from his fingertip. Then, the drop of blood flew into the air and flew towards Jin Guang. Then, the second drop of blood and the third drop of blood flew towards their foreheads with a red line. Jin Guang and the other two only felt a slight chill on their foreheads. The blood had completely seeped into their bodies. At the same time, Li Anping's voice slowly rang in their ears. "This drop of blood contains a simple consciousness algorithm that I've created. When it detects that your vital signs are far lower than normal, it will be activated. After it's activated, it will extract the vacuum zero-point energy around you and change the electronic structure of atoms and molecules according to the surrounding environment to help you." Speaking of this, Li Anping looked at the three in front of him. Jin Guang and Yan Bei were basically confused. Of the two of them, one had a high school diploma, while the other did not even have one. As for Fang Haojie, he was slightly better as he graduated from Academy City, but he did not seem to understand much either. "The three of you, don't bury yourself in training all day. Read more books." Li Anping shook his head and continued, "In short, after you're beaten half to death, you'll be revived with full health and full mana. Then, you'll be able to attack and defend." Now, the three of them understood. Jin Guang nodded. "So it's the Eternal Shield." Yan Bei denied. "No, it's even more powerful than that. This will be even stronger after revival." "It can't be revived, right?" Fang Haojie whispered. "It can only be used when you're heavily injured." Li Anping sighed and continued, "Also, you have to remember that this thing consumes a lot of my energy. It's not something that can be made casually. Don't use it recklessly. During the operation, you'll be the core force. Use your strength well to protect the others in the team." Seeing the three of them nod, he continued, "One last reminder. Once the consciousness algorithm that I wrote confirms that there's no hope for you to survive, in order to prevent you from being captured alive, it will directly activate the self-destruct program and turn you into an antimatter bomb." Li Anping's lips curled into a cruel smile. "So be careful. Don't accidentally die." The three of them tensed up and said in a serious tone, "Yes, sir." Not long after the three of them left, Lu Feng also walked into the study to meet Li Anping. As the long-term head of the intelligence department, he was the person in charge of this special operation team. Even Jin Guang, Yan Bei, and Fang Haojie had to listen to his orders when they were on the Mondo continent. Aside from that, this was an inspection trip. The main purpose was to collect information on the Mondo continent. Therefore, other than ability users like Jin Guang, Yen Bei, and Feng Haojie, many physicists, chemists, sociologists, biologists, and other researchers would be brought along to collect all kinds of local information. This would provide the necessary theoretical and data support for the Pan-Continent Alliance and Li Anping's future decisions. After all, they were two completely different worlds. They weren't even sure if Earth and the Mondo continent were in the same universe. In this case, any small change in the universe's parameters could have a huge impact on humans, not to mention the various biological, climate, and environmental factors. In fact, Li Anping had already sent people to collect all the things that Jonah had touched. Just on them alone, they found more than 23 types of microorganisms that didn't exist on Earth. As he spoke, Li Anping gave Lu Feng 2 Tatsuka swords to protect him. With the special equipment provided by the RES as well, Li Anping believed that the inspection team should be safe as long as they didn't cause any trouble. After basically telling him everything he wanted to tell him, Li Anping asked, "How's Li Qian? Can she take over after you leave?" Lu Feng answered carefully, "It shouldn't be a problem. Miss Li Qian is very smart, and she has been in the intelligence department for more than 2 years. She knows the entire process." "That's good." Li Anping closed his eyes and waved a hand. "Let's go. You'll be in charge of the inspection team's training starting next week. I'll give you 2 weeks at most." The moment Li Anping closed his eyes, his attention was focused on his Qi avatar. The avatar was standing on the white ground. Around him were dozens of workers who were dressed like spacesuit. They were either testing environmental data or controlling engineering robots to build an outpost around the portal. Li Anping's psychic energy incarnation stood in the middle of the 2 portals, in charge of guarding them. On the other hand, in front of the portal that led to the Mondo continent, a crawler-type AI robot was slowly moving toward it. Before the special task force entered, the staff here would use the robot to do a simple search of the Mondo continent's portal. Chapter 372. New Dongyang, East 23rd District. This was a large area that looked like a primeval forest. Because of the density of monsters, even some bounty hunters who specialized in finding rare monsters were not willing to come here. But today, this desolate place welcomed a group of guests. Lu Feng walked at the front, and behind him, there were a total of 10 men and women. Among them, there were yellow, white, and black people. It seemed that many races had gathered. In addition to Yen Bei, Jin Guang, and Feng Haojie, there were also Tony Abel and Brian from the Federation, as well as people from Ice Fortress, Southern Border, and Law Nation. They were all elites that Xia Dragonfinch and the Imaginary Agency had found from all over the Earth. Under the leadership of Lu Feng, they would be responsible for exploring the other world and protecting the accompanying scientists. Lu Feng walked at the front and said, "We don't have much time. We only have about a week or so. In this week, we will organize a field training like this every morning, and in the afternoon, we will study the general knowledge of the magic world. At night, you will take turns fighting Mage Jonah." In addition to what Lu Feng said, the language part would be solved by Jonah using language proficiency. In addition, they also had to receive a series of vaccines urgently developed by the Royal Academy of Sciences to help fight against the various germs that the robots had detected on the other side of the portal. In addition, there were all kinds of training, which were compressed by Lu Feng into a week. After a week, they would step into the portal and begin the inspection of the Mondo continent. They would decide whether the Earth's attitude towards the Mondo continent would be friendly, hostile, or something else. 7 days later, before the inspection team was about to enter the Mondo continent through the portal, in the northernmost part of the Mondo continent, in the Cloud Courtyard, which was located at the highest peak of the continent, a unique meeting was also going on. The 5 most powerful countries on the Mondo continent, including the Holy Roland Empire, had all sent their representatives. There was only one person on the continent who could summon the representatives of these 5 powerful countries in just a few days. He was the demigod Dionysus, who was also the spiritual leader of all the mages in the Mage Guild. He represented the most powerful man in the world. Have you heard? The bloodline left behind by His Excellency Dionysus before he became a sorcerer? Yes, it's said to be a boy named Adam. This meeting seems to be related to him. Are you serious? Do you think this boy? Don't talk nonsense. It's said that his bloodline has been tested, and he does indeed have the bloodline of a demigod. Just as the representatives of the 5 countries were whispering to each other, a young man who looked to be in his teens walked in. He looked very handsome and wore a gray robe. The robe looked very ordinary and inconspicuous, but in the eyes of the representatives of the 5 nations, it was a shocking piece of information. It's actually the shadow robe. His Excellency Dionysus actually bestowed this to him. Although Dionysus didn't participate in this meeting, the robe that was draped on Adam's body was enough to make the people who were originally careless stop being frivolous. They looked at Adam with eyes full of jealousy, surprise, and envy. Adam ignored the emotions of the people, and walked directly to the main seat of the conference table. Behind him were Khadijah and the Night Beast, who had changed into mage attire and had their heads covered in cloaks. Looking at the scrutinizing, questioning, and flattering gazes of the people, Adam, or rather Shang Tian, smiled gently as if he couldn't feel the pressure contained in those gazes at all. He coughed softly and said, "Everyone, I've called all of you here this time mainly because in the near future there will be a huge disaster in the entire Mondo continent. This disaster is so terrifying that it's enough to overturn the countries that you're in. No, not only that, it will even destroy the glory of mages, and destroy all the humans in the entire Mondo continent." Adam's words made everyone feel that he was exaggerating things just to scare them. Those who were sent to participate in the meeting were all sly old foxes in interpersonal relationships and politics, not to mention their attainments in magic. Hence, it was impossible for Adam's pyramid scheme to move them. However, he didn't mind. Seeing that everyone was silent, he continued, "At the west end of the continent, in the Umla Basin, a gate to hell has been opened. Countless demons will surge out from that gate. They have great power, but they are completely immersed in endless desires. Their appearance is destined to cause a bloodbath on the Mondo continent." Adam's words immediately caused everyone to whisper to each other, "Demons? Hell? Mr. Adam, are you sure you're not joking? Demons that can overturn the entire continent? Do they also have great power like Sir Demigod?" The magic civilization on the Mondo continent had developed for countless years. Although it was limited by the number of mages, it lacked the popularity brought about by science on Earth. However, through the development of magic, most mages had long confirmed that the so-called gods, heaven, demons, and hell were just tools made up by religions to control believers. It could be said that in the entire Mondo continent, as long as one was a low-rank mage or above, as well as most of the upper-class nobles, they were all downright atheists. They firmly believed in the power of magic. As for Dionysus' title as a demigod, it was purely out of respect for his power. Magic was the biggest religion in the entire Mondo continent. Adam was also deeply aware of this, so he wasn't surprised by everyone's doubts. Instead, he extended his hand and placed his palm in front of Khadijah. Under everyone's surprised gaze, a pure white longsword was placed in Adam's hand. "This is Holy Sword Cardinus. How is this possible?" This holy sword should have gone missing in the final Holy War. In the historical records of the Mondo continent, Holy Sword Cardinus was created more than 4,000 years ago by the first emperor who unified the entire country, Odysseus, who was known as the Holy King. He gathered a total of 200 top-notch magic shooters at that time to create this holy sword, hoping to pass down the legacy of this sword so that his dynasty would never decline. Unfortunately, even though he had the most powerful power, the country he created eventually fell apart due to internal strife. Holy Sword Cardenas also went missing after that. Legend had it that this holy sword had all kinds of incredible power. Even an ordinary person with the holy sword could have the power to destroy a city with one blow. It was considered the strongest magic conductor in the entire Mondo continent. There was even a rumor about Holy Sword Cardenas. When the holy sword appears again, the Mondo continent will also welcome the unification of the Mondo continent once again. As a mage murmured this sentence, the holy sword in Adam's hand glowed with a milky white light, as if it was enveloping Adam's entire body. Of course, the mages present couldn't completely believe the rumor of the continent being unified once again, but in the face of Holy Sword Cardenas, this existence known as the strongest magic conductor, they still lost their minds for a moment. Everyone, the holy sword has appeared because the entire continent is about to welcome an unprecedented disaster. If you don't want to believe it, then after returning, you can send people to the Umla Basin to look for the portal that sends demons. Faced with the shadow robe bestowed by the demigod and the holy sword in Adam's hand, the people present didn't seem to reject the so-called demons as much. "Sir, may I ask what kind of existence the demons you speak of are?" Adam withdrew the holy sword and continued, "They have similar appearances to humans, but they are more evil and greedy. They don't have the power of magic, but they have another kind of power called technology and superpowers." Adam clapped his hands, and the servant beside him immediately brought up a pistol. "This is the weapon I seized from them, they call it a pistol." Adam said to a magic shooter among the representatives, "Sir Lawrence, I'll use this pistol to attack you to demonstrate its prowess." "Come on," Lawrence said casually. "But how are you going to use it to attack? I can't see any part of his body that can be used to attack others. Are you going to throw it at me?" Lawrence's words brought about a series of soft laughter. But in the next moment, a gunshot rang out, interrupting everyone's laughter. Lawrence frowned and used Mage's hand to pick up the bullet that had been distorted and deformed from the ground. He asked curiously, "Oh? He attacks by spraying these metal particles?" "Yes. This kind of weapon can be mass-produced on the demon's side. Their greatest advantage is their quantity." Lawrence shook his head. "With this kind of attack power, ordinary superior mages wouldn't be able to break through the defensive force field even if they let him shoot for an entire day." Night Beast couldn't help but say, "But this is only the most basic weapon. They have many more powerful weapons called tanks and missiles. They can all be mass-produced. If superior mages can't do it, then just send a few magic shooters." This sentence seemed to represent the thoughts of all the mages present. Most of them didn't seem to care about the so-called technological weapons. In their eyes, the pistol that Adam had shown could only be considered as an interesting toy. But the superpowers that Adam had mentioned were considered to be the abilities of warlocks, and were slightly valued. "We've already understood the power of the demons. Then may I ask what Sir Demigod's plans are?" One of the representatives asked the question that everyone present wanted to ask the most. Compared to the illusory demons that didn't even have magic, the will of the demigod was more important to them. It was like how people in developed countries viewed tribes in the primitive forest. Demons that didn't know magic were ignorant wild beasts in their eyes, even if these wild beasts had mastered some special technique. Father has made new discoveries in magic recently and has devoted himself wholeheartedly to his research. Even I can't go to the laboratory to look for him. But he said earlier that if anyone on the continent is able to capture a demon, he will personally expend magic power to permanently cast a level 7 spell on that warrior. Before Adam finished his words, a strange glow appeared in everyone's eyes. Compared to the demons that didn't have magic abilities, The magic cast by the demigod clearly attracted their attention more. Immediately, more than half of the representatives expressed that they would send the army and mages to capture the demons. Looking at the backs of these representatives as they passed through the teleportation portal and slowly left, the corners of Adam's mouth curled up into a smile. Beside him, Night Beast was somewhat worried. Adam, is this okay? Why don't you show them the more powerful weapons from Earth? They'll be at a disadvantage if they underestimate the enemy so much. That's exactly what I want them to be, at a disadvantage. Adam laughed softly. Uncle Knight, what do you think is the biggest difference between the magic world and Earth? Is it the two different civilizations of magic and technology? No, it's the knowledge of the world. People on Earth use technology to understand the world, but the people here rely on magic to understand the world. They won't take technology seriously before they pay a sufficient price. Thousands of years of history of using magic to conquer nature will give them a unique pride when facing Earth's army. People on Earth who haven't mastered magic are no different from primitive people in their eyes now. Adam turned his head and walked to the edge of the cloud courtyard. Looking at the continent of Mondo under his feet, he said slowly, "If they realize the power of Earth too early, they won't fight so easily. What we need to do is let the blood and hatred continue to escalate before they attempt to negotiate with Earth. We'll drag Li Anping and Xia Dragonfinch into the vortex of this war." Next to him, Cutia said, "I'm not interested in war, but are you sure there's no problem with Dionysus? Let's not talk about your identity first. I don't think he fully approves of you. This guy's talent alone is too terrifying. It's hard to imagine that he can improve his power to such a level with only magic. You just gave him so much scientific information on Earth so easily. Aren't you afraid of raising a tiger?" Adam shook his head. "As I said, it's a matter of perception. Dionysus' talent is indeed terrifying. If he was born on Earth, he might have a chance to reach the ultimate level. However, his experience in the world of magic has limited his vision. To change this perception, he needs time, not talent. During this time, he'll be our best weapon to resist Li Anping." Adam raised his hands and made a hugging gesture toward the boundless land below the mountain. It looked like he wanted to hug the entire continent of Mondo. "Li Anping, can you feel it? Your sinful life will be ended by me with my own hands." At the same time, Lu Feng and the others had already put on their equipment in the underwater base. On the surface, they were all wearing coarse linen clothes. However, under these medieval clothes, they were all wearing the latest nano-armor created by the Royal Academy of Sciences. They were also hidden by optical camouflage. Lu Feng looked back at everyone. "Let's go." In the next moment, the group of 18 people, including 11 ability users and 7 members of the Royal Academy of Sciences, passed through the portal. After arriving at the Land of White, they would pass through the portal of Mondo and begin this adventure in the world of magic. Chapter 373. Tony Abel stepped through the portal, and what appeared in front of him was an endless forest. According to Jonah's information, this was the west of the Mondo continent, known as the Umla Basin. The air he inhaled through his nose felt a little moist, just as the scientists had predicted before they set off. This should be a continental basin created by the movement of the Earth's crust, so the air was very moist. Tony looked up at the sky, and could only see a giant fireball burning slowly in the sky. According to the robot's detection, the Mondo continent here was the same as Earth, in every solar system. However, astronomers had yet to find any celestial bodies that humans were familiar with in the night sky. Maybe this place was too far away from Earth, or maybe this place was in a different universe than Earth. However, Tony didn't care about that. He only knew that the gravity and air composition here were suitable for ordinary people to live. Just as Tony was stunned, a golden-haired man in front of him greeted him, "Hey Tony, come help me set up the barracks." The golden-haired man was more than 2 meters tall, and looked like a standing polar bear. Every time he spoke, his voice sounded like he was wearing a loudspeaker. This golden-haired man was called Ivan, and he was from the Ice Fortress Kanyavizin family. Before Li Anping ascended to the throne, he had sent the head of the Ice Fortress Splinter Group, Sergei, to Tianjing. He was also one of the Ice Fortress's elite ability users. However, in Adam's eyes, Ivan was more like a big bear that could walk upright, although their bloodline ability, werewolf form, had nothing to do with bears. As someone who had been possessed by Li Anping's doppelganger, Tony Abel's combat power was naturally at the elite level. In particular, his experience of being possessed had aroused the curiosity and envy of countless people. Ivan was naturally one of them, and when the team was first formed, he expressed full goodwill to Tony. Tony took the components from Ivan and began to set up the camp. This newly developed component had the ability to self-expand. As long as the user chose the program in advance, the components could self-expand and connect to complete the construction of the camp. At the side, the others were busy with their own task. They were either building camps or exploring the surrounding environment. Brian, who came from the Federation together with Tony, had the Wolf of Flame ability. He was the bloodline ability user who had once fought against Hygram and Fabrizio with Tony. Right now, he was adjusting a gigantic sphere in front of him. This was a simple satellite they had brought with them. There were more than 20 similar satellites on the other side of the portal, and they would be launched one after another to explore the planet that the RES had named Planet Magic. 2 hours later, with the help of superpowers and advanced technology, the entire camp was quickly set up. Most of the aptitude users stayed in the camp, except for Yen Bei, who left alone to explore the entire Umla Basin. Other scientists began to conduct various planned physical and chemical experiments in simple laboratories to determine the differences between this world and Earth. There were also scientists who were collecting soil, plant, and animal specimens. Of course, this often required the assistance of ability users. According to the Pan-Continent Alliance's plan, they would stay near the portal for about 3 days. 3 days later, they would start their own missions. Since the people of the Mondo continent looked more like white people, Jin Guang shapeshifted, Lu Feng shapeshifted, and a group of white people would find a way to blend into the local society of the Mondo continent. By establishing certain social relations on the Mondo continent, they would be able to obtain the information the Pan-Continent Alliance needed. On the other hand, yellow-skinned people like Yen Bei, Fang Haojie, and Fang Yuelin would focus on collecting information about the natural and ecological environment of the Mondo continent. After activating the ability of the steel spear, Yen Bei was covered in a layer of silver-white metal from head to toe. He was hovering in the sky above the Umla Basin at subsonic speed. The ability of the steel spear in Yen Bei's hand came from Vivian, a rank 5 aptitude user from the Void Agency. After activating the ability, not only did a pair of steel-like wings break out of his back, but his whole body was also covered in metal. His strength, speed, reaction, agility, and other physical attributes were all greatly improved. The armor covering him not only had amazing defensive power, but also concealed many weapons with special abilities. The chi on Yen Bei's body was transformed by the armor into a white turbulence. It looked like some kind of plasma jet engine, increasing Yen Bei's speed once again. He flew toward the border of the Umla Basin. Under Yen Bei's observation, this basin was just as Jonah had told him. It was a completely uninhabited land. In the vast forest, there were all kinds of animals. However, because there were all kinds of rare animal and plant resources in the basin, Yen Bei could also see some people like hunters and herbalists working in the basin. Yen Bei flew in the sky at high speed. These ordinary people could not sense his existence at all. Yen Bei did not want to communicate with them. This was not his mission. Moreover, according to the plan of the Alliance's General Staff, this time, Earth's entire operation to obtain information about the magic planet had to be like a ghost. It would not affect the magic planet at all and not leave any unnecessary traces. Like a ghost, he would pass through them, sense them, and understand them without them noticing. Yenbei circled in the sky and planned to end today's patrol and return to the camp. However, just as he turned around, a squawk suddenly came from the sky. A flying bird the size of a car descended from the sky and grabbed at Yenbei's location. Oh? Is this the animal here? Yenbei turned around and looked at the giant bird that was rushing toward him. It obviously saw him as prey. Compared to the animals on Earth, it's a bit more ferocious. The next moment, a small dot appeared on the giant bird's head. The collapsing force field squeezed the bird's head into a small dot that could not be seen. The headless bird's body fell to the ground due to inertia. Yenbei did not even look at him. He turned around and flew back to the camp. Just as Yenbei activated his ability, in a small city dozens of kilometers away from the Umla Basin, a woman with wine-red hair suddenly opened her eyes and said to Dong-er, "They're here." Chapter 374. A few minutes later, Flant returned to the group's seats. Lu Feng glanced at him and found that the other party's eyes were a little dazed. He looked a little dazed. He frowned and asked, "Are you okay?" Golden Light also looked over. He stood up slowly and said to Tony, "Something's wrong. Use your psychic energy to check the surroundings." Although mages could sense psychic energy, their ability to sense psychic energy was not strong because they had been used to sensing magic waves for thousands of years. As long as the ability user did not expose his psychic energy, they would not be able to sense it. So, in order not to attract attention, Lu Feng and the others carefully hid their psychic energy and did not use it to alert the surroundings. Golden Light's psychic energy, in particular, was too powerful and eye-catching. It was easy to be surrounded by magicians. A few seconds later, Tony and the others' expressions changed. With their psychic energy, they could feel that many warriors with weapons were slowly approaching them from the nearby street. At the same time, Flant reached out his hand. He, who was under the spell, charm person, took out an explosive rune given to him by a magician. With a loud boom, a terrifying explosion resounded through the sky of the small town. The entire house of the restaurant collapsed. The diners inside died before they could react in time under the shockwave and flames of the explosion. 500 meters away, a young magician in luxurious clothes and wearing a monocle looked at the explosion in the distance and said with a smile, "It seems to have succeeded? This explosive rune is enough to blow up the city walls. I hope those demons don't all die and I can't report back." Another middle-aged magician said, "According to the information provided by Adam, these demon warriors all have strong vitality and defense. I'm afraid one explosive rune is not enough to kill them." "Oh no," that kid from the Farah family rushed up. "Damn it, that kid wants to snatch people." At that moment, their expressions changed at the same time. They saw a golden pillar of light shoot up from the explosion. Like a miracle, it broke a big hole in the clouds in the sky. Endless golden psychic energy emerged from Golden Light's body. In the explosion just now, everyone was covered by his psychic energy. They were unharmed except for Flant. Lauren screamed. Flant, who had taken out the explosive rune, was already lying on the ground. His head had been baptized by the flames and shock waves, and his face was completely disfigured. However, the area below his head was protected by the nanoarmor, so he was still unharmed. But even so, he was already dead. Compared to Lauren, who was a scholar, the other ability users and military expert Watson were not as panicked. "It's an ambush, but I don't know if it's targeting our identities." Jean Guang looked at Lu Feng and said, "What do you think?" After saying that, Tony, Ivan, and Brian looked at Lu Feng, waiting for his decision. I'll leave it to you. We'll leave first. Lu Feng looked at the street after the smoke and dust from the explosion gradually dissipated. The sound of armor clanking rang out, and rows of fully armed soldiers surrounded them from all directions. Every soldier's body was flowing with multicolored light. Clearly, they were all enchanted. In any case, let's break out of here first. Lu Feng pointed to the east. If we get separated, we'll gather at the previous camp. Jin Guang, you'll be in charge of protecting and covering us. Lauren and Watson, you guys follow me. In the next moment, silver-white nanoarmor covered everyone's heads. Light and shadow camouflage was activated, turning them invisible. However, Jin Guang was not as low-key as them. The silver-white nanoarmor covered him from head to toe, and he turned into a silver human figure. At the same time, golden psychic energy roared out like a tsunami, drowning out the entire town. The feedback from the psychic energy, the infrared, sonar, radiation, and other detection devices in the nanoarmor all allowed Jin Guang to know the situation of the entire battlefield like the back of his hand. In the infrared vision, the team members who were invisible with optical camouflage were hiding in a corner, waiting for Jin Guang to open up a path for them. Jin Guang casually swept a glance, and in the next moment, a mage flying in the sky entered his sight. Superior Mage Tamir Farah. The mage looked at Jin Guang with a smile, as if he was looking at countless rewards. He said, "Silver-white evil spirit, if you surrender without putting up a fight, you will suffer fewer injuries." Jin Guang ignored him, and only stretched out a hand. In the next moment, a golden psychic cannon shot out in an unreasonable manner. The psychic cannon, which had a diameter of more than 30 meters, completely engulfed the mage. Not only him, but the surrounding soldiers, buildings, and land were all covered by the golden psychic cannon like a tsunami. Regardless of whether it was the defensive force field, magic armor, or magic power shield, all of the defensive means in front of this extremely barbaric and naked violence, under the impact of the psychic cannon, all of them were turned into dust. When the golden psychic cannon slowly dissipated in the air, the entire east side of the town had become a piece of white land. The mages, soldiers, and buildings from before had all disappeared. Through infrared vision, Jin Guang could see that the invisible team members had already left toward the east. He nodded, turned around, and looked at the other side of the encirclement. Just as he turned around, two spells hit his body one after another. Scorching Sun Blast. Freezing Orb. Two spells, one red and one blue, hit Jin Guang's body directly. Although the Mondo continent did not develop science, the mages would still conclude some simple rules after a long period of practice. For example, thermal expansion and cold contraction. The two types of attacks, one hot and one cold, were far more destructive than 1 + 1 was greater than 2. If it was just a simple nanoarmor, they might have succeeded. However, whether it was Jin Guang's psychic cannon or the molecular stagnation layer on the surface of the nanoarmor, neither of them could be broken through by simply accelerating or slowing down the movement of molecules. Seeing the silver demon floating in the air unharmed, the two mages who were 500 meters away exclaimed in shock. "How is this possible? The power of a sorcerer?" In the next moment, Jin Guang flashed and rushed in front of them with a long golden tail of flame. The two mages had already activated the spells on their magic items at the same time. Blink. Slow movement. Exhaustion of power. Looking at the mage in front of him, who had suddenly teleported away, and his own body that had suddenly slowed down, Jin Guang roared, and the golden psychic cannon rushed out in all directions like a volcanic eruption. Feeling the incredible power in the golden psychic cannon, the two mages' expressions changed drastically. They exclaimed, "How is this possible? Using your power so wastefully, is your power infinite? This way of fighting is just like a child squandering gold coins." No matter how surprised, disbelieving, or fearful they were, under their pale faces, the golden psychic cannon seemed to be endless. It completely covered and engulfed the area within a radius of several kilometers. Terrifying impacts and explosions were happening around them all the time. Magic shield, protective force field, blink, steel body. One protective spell after another was cast by them, each one just right, and the skills contained in each one were countless times more brilliant than Jin Guang's pure psychic cannon. If it could be said that the two mages were surprised at first, but they were still somewhat disdainful of this evil demon's crude methods, then when their spells were broken one after another by the violent psychic energy, and when their opponent's energy didn't appear, instead, it was their own energy that was gradually running out. Despair and disbelief appeared on their faces. How is this possible? How can your power be so abundant? Even a sorcerer wouldn't be able to last so long in such a crude way of using it. I don't believe it, this is an illusion. Yes, it must be an illusion. Jin Guang ignored the desperate cries of the two mages and increased the output of psychic cannon. Their faces that were on the verge of collapse were completely crushed. A few seconds later, a huge golden fireball had enveloped the entire town. From afar, it looked like a golden sun was slowly rising from the surface of the earth. Just as Lu Feng's group was besieged, Yan Bei's group, who were passing by a snowy mountain, was also besieged. There was no end to it. More than 100,000 undead army surrounded the group of people in the valley. About 10 kilometers away from the town where Jin Guang was besieged, Donger looked at the huge fireball slowly rising from the ground and said to Adam, who was still in the cloud courtyard through the communicator, "They encountered it, but Jin Guang might have broken through the 5th energy level. Ordinary superior mages are no match for him." Is that so? Adam thought for a moment and said, "Are there any survivors?" Donger's pupils kept shrinking, as if she could see the situation in the distance. "There should be some civilians who survived. Kill them. In short, we can't let the mages know too early that Earth has the power of a sorcerer and above. Think of a reason." Got it. This was Adam's train of thought. He wanted the mages to maintain their pride and slowly reveal Earth's strength to the world of mages. They couldn't pay too much attention to Earth's strength, but they couldn't underestimate Earth's strength either. Before the world of mages truly took Earth's strength seriously, he would do his best to arrange for both sides to constantly clash with each other until the grudge between them reached a point where it was impossible to resolve. Of course, Adam also knew that it was impossible to do all this perfectly. He could only do his best. At this moment, Donger's voice was heard again. "The satellites they launched have been discovered. Should we destroy them? Of course, don't leave a single one behind. Completely cut off their communication." A cruel smile appeared on Adam's face. What do you think Li Anping would do if the entire expedition team sent by Earth were to stay behind? If the Mage Guild and the 5 great empires don't send enough sorcerers, I don't think they can kill Yan Bei and Jin Guang. Ah. Adam laughed. Who knows? At the same time on Earth, Li Qian connected to Li Anping's communication channel. "Your Majesty, we've lost contact with Lu Feng and the others." "Lost contact?" Li Anping said indifferently. "Tell me the details." "It's not a normal loss of contact. The 27 satellites we launched on the magic planet have all been disconnected. They may have all been attacked." "The satellites were attacked?" Li Anping frowned. According to Jonah's information, the people of the magic world should not have the concept of satellite. Only a few powerful mages understood that the ground under their feet was a sphere. However, the satellites were tens of thousands of meters high. It was impossible for mages to discover and attack them. Moreover, they were attacked at the same time. Also, before we lost contact, both of Lu Feng's teams were attacked. I understand. Li Anping's eyes flashed. In the next moment, he disappeared from the palace. Chapter 375. After passing through several corridors, Li Anping walked along the underground corridor toward the military warp gate under Xia Dragonfinch. Along the way, countless ability users and staff members knelt down and saluted him. It was as if he was braving the wind and waves alone. In order to be able to send troops directly to the underwater base and cross the World Crossing Gate, the Alliance had set up 2 warp gate halls in the Virtual Numeric Service and Xia Dragonfinch respectively. They could transport Earth's troops to the underwater base at any time, anywhere, and then cross the warp gate and enter the other world. As Li Anping walked, his figure was captured by countless cameras and turned into various signals that were transmitted to the hands of countless upper echelons. Li Qian's message was the first to be accepted by Li Anping. "Your Majesty, where are you going?" Li Anping replied casually as he walked. "Didn't you say that you lost contact with them?" "I'm going to look for them." Li Qian hesitated for a moment before saying, "But according to the analysis of the General Staff Department, it's best that Your Majesty doesn't delve too deeply into the magical world." The General Staff Department was recently established by Li Anping personally. A group of top-notch elites from all walks of life were selected to help him come up with some strategies to deal with the other world. Considering that he might face many different worlds in the future, although Li Anping's brain power was strong, it was impossible for him to always consider everything. Therefore, he needed a group of elites to assist him. They would help him come up with many strategies. In general, the General Staff Department was responsible for helping Li Anping come up with strategies. However, the specific decisions were still left to Li Anping to make. The General Staff Department and Li Anping had a point of agreement regarding the countermeasures to deal with the magical world. Li Anping's main body must not delve too deeply into the magical world, or even head into the magical world himself to engage in various battles and attacks. There were 2 main considerations for doing this. First, it would be very easy for the 2 worlds to be dragged into a complete war. The General Staff Department felt that it was very unwise to act rashly before the situation between the enemy and their side was clear. The second was more practical, and that was the so-called strategic depth. As long as Li Anping's psychic avatar could guard the world gate, and Li Anping himself could reach the underwater base and the Land of White through the warp gate at any time, then Earth would be able to place the most intense battle in the other party's territory. And once the other party pulled the battlefield to Earth, considering the level of destructive power of Li Anping and Higram, it would be very easy to create a situation where Earth would still suffer heavy losses even if they won. It was the same for the magic world. Even if they wanted to fight, they had to fight on the opposite side of the portal, on the magic planet. For example, in the worst-case scenario, Li Anping went to the magic world, and the so-called demigod, Dionysus, whose strength was unknown, came to Earth. Then, compared to the medieval society of the Mondo continent, Earth would definitely suffer more losses. As long as Li Anping continued to guard the portal, Earth would have an absolute advantage regardless of whether they fought or retreated. Of course, if even Li Anping couldn't withstand the other party's attack and could only retreat to Earth, then there was nothing to talk about. Li Anping agreed with this strategy of the General Staff Department. However, his style of doing things had always been straightforward and pressing forward. Therefore, after learning that the expedition team had lost contact, he wanted to know what was going on immediately. Moreover, this didn't require him to really go deep into the magic world. He only needed to guard the world gate with his psychic avatar, or his original body to pass through the world gate without going deep. Either method would work. Therefore, Li Anping replied, "Let the troops at the world gate send reconnaissance robots over and do a comprehensive search of the expedition team. I'll be there right away. Don't worry, I won't go deep into the magic world." The expedition team suddenly disappeared, and all our satellites were attacked. This situation is definitely unusual. If someone is targeting us, then I have to find them first. Since Li Anping had already decided, Li Qian knew that she couldn't stop him. Understood. I'll inform the forward base immediately. 1 minute later, Li Anping had already passed through the world gate of the underwater base and arrived at the White Land. The general and his psychic avatar of the forward base both appeared before him. Li Anping directly took Higram out of his clothes and tossed him into the psychic avatar's body. Stay here during this period of time. Don't cause any trouble. When the large group of people saw Higram's appearance, although they were astonished, Li Anping didn't say anything. They naturally wouldn't ask. The general at the side walked up and said, "Your Majesty, the drone has already passed through the world gate and set off from the temporary camp." Before Jin Guang and the others left, the temporary camp in the magic world had already concealed the entire world gate using optical camouflage and defensive fortifications, turning it into a temporary stronghold. This was also to prevent another person like Jonah from accidentally discovering the world-traversing door. Hearing the general's report, Li Anping nodded and walked toward the world gate. On the way here, he had thought about it for a while and decided to have his original body make a trip there personally. He would use his powerful magnetic field to release high-frequency electromagnetic waves to search for traces of the expedition team. According to the data from the satellites, the planet where the magic world was located was a planet that was about 4/5 the size of Earth. Other than the so-called Mondo continent, there were 2 other relatively small continental plates and countless islands. This time, it wasn't as obvious as the previous time with the missiles. The search targets were all on the surface, so the difficulty was obviously higher. However, Li Anping knew the communication channel of the other party's nanotechnology armor. Even if it took him a few hours to search using electromagnetic waves, it would still be much more convenient than using his psychic avatar to fly over. This was also the reason why Li Anping had decided to have his original body make a trip there. Therefore, under everyone's gaze, Li Anping directly stepped through the world gate. However, after stepping through the world gate, what appeared in front of Li Anping was not the base or the Umla basin that he had imagined. What appeared in front of Li Anping was a huge, empty library. Endless rows of bookshelves filled Li Anping's vision. However, the words on the covers of the books were not in any language that Li Anping knew. 100 meters in front of Li Anping, a silver-haired man sat on a chair with his back facing Li Anping. He seemed to be reading something carefully. Judging from the speed at which the man flipped through the paper, his reading speed was very fast. It could be said that he was reading 10 lines at a glance. With his superb eyesight, Li Anping could see that there were many books on the man's desk. The words on the books were very familiar to him. He was even familiar with the contents of the book. 3rd grade natural science, 1st grade mathematics, and high school physics. They were all teaching materials and books like this. The silver-haired man stretched and said in fluent Xia language, "I didn't expect to catch a big fish the first time I pulled in the net." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.